Sometimes I hearken back to not sometimes. Let me rephrase that. Let's just start this whole thing over again because that was a huge shoot and a miss by me because instead of sometimes I should have said this. Eddie, can you fire that music back up again? We'll start this whole thing over again. All the time I sit around and I think about things from my childhood or the past and how it relates to today. I don't sometimes do that. I habitually do that, right? And last night, again, insomnia, so I'm laying there at 2:48 in the morning, and I'm scrolling through, and I'm thinking about everything in terms of the world of sport today. And by the way, good afternoon to you on this Thursday. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison here as well. He's the one that just had to replay the intro music so that I could correctly state what goes through this deranged mind of mine. How are you, Eddie?
I'm great. First of all, could you imagine having the size of my head with your intellect and your curiosity?
Well, no.
You would literally never sleep.
Hang on. Before we restart the show again, I'd like to restart that comment. Did you just say intellect?
I did.
Really?
I did.
Now, are you using intellect in the proper context there? Because that's a tremendous compliment. Curiosity, I will agree with. Intellect, I will not so much. But I take that as a compliment.
Well, we wouldn't have the brain droppings sounder if you weren't intellectual.
Well, here's the thing. I am what was referred to as a kid growing up as I didn't apply myself, right? I was a slacker. So my 2.2 GPA and my graduating class rank of 482 would say otherwise. But I appreciate the sentiment nonetheless.
So you were the guy I hated in high school where it was a group project and you coasted and got the A and let all the other people do all the work.
That pretty much is what happens every day from noon to 3, Eddie. I mean, let's be real here,
okay.
Right?
Glad you just admitted it. Now we have it on record.
Okay, so when I was a kid back in those days when I was not applying myself, maybe it was because I was up late anticipating and preparing for big events. I loved big events. I was naturally curious, correct. My parents, I will give them credit, I guess, for letting me stay up even at the youngest of ages. I would always stay up to watch the late news. And my parents say, okay, it's bedtime. No, I got to watch the kicker. I mean, I got to stay till 11:30. I was always fascinated with current events, things going on, in particular in the city of Indianapolis and et cetera. And anytime there was a big story going on, I was all in. I wanted to see it. And I think most people remember this. If I had to guess, and I didn't look it up, but I would say this was in 1985 or 1986. We will have Eddie Garrison, the official show fact checker, look this up. But when Geraldo Rivera opened Al Capone's vault. Now, can you look up for me, if you could, Eddie, when Geraldo Rivera opened Al Capone's vault? I'm going to guess it was 85 or 86. And there was all this anticipation about it, all this buildup for probably days. I mean, in my mind, it feels like weeks. Maybe it was that day, but there was, it was a huge promotion. Geraldo Rivera, who at that time was kind of an unknown, he was really making a name for himself based on this event. He had access to the vault of Al Capone. And they did on national television, Tune In Tonight, and they did all this, the history of Al Capone and the corrupt nature of Al Capone and the tax evasion of Al Capone, and they had this vault, and who in the world knows what's in it? There might be bodies. There might be millions of dollars. There might be, drugs, guns, who knows, right? It's Al Capone. Did you find the year?
I did. 1986.
Okay, what was the date? Does it happen to say?
It does.
It feels like it was in the wintertime. I'm going to say it was around now, okay? October of 86.
April 21st.
Okay, April 21st of 86. So, well, how appropriate, just a week after taxes were due. So, Al Capone's vault, Geraldo, and everybody, I mean, the whole country's waiting in anticipation. And they finally, they of course, build it all the way up until the very end of the show. And then Geraldo's like, here we go, folks. I'm seeing this for the first time just like you are. And they crack open the door, and they get this staff that comes out, and they open it up, and they pull the door back. And there's I think there might have been an empty green beer bottle. And that was it. It was nothing. Absolutely nothing, right? And I thought to myself, the NBA trade deadline is Al Capone's vault. Because even though if you listen to this show, and certainly if you listen to John, and, I would assume, obviously, Kevin in the morning and Mark and, Andy last week, I think we all said, but certainly I know we've been pretty emphatic. I'm not saying that with Miles Turner, you don't make a deal if a deal comes your way that makes you better. Like I said, if the Charlotte Hornets called and said, you know what, we're interested in sending you Brandon Miller and a first-round pick and Mark Williams for Miles Turner, I got news for you. Miles Turner probably is calling up U-Haul or 2 men in a truck. But obviously, last night, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at my phone, and the thing that made me think about Al Capone's vault is the fact that I see last night the Los Angeles Lakers, who have been as busy and as active as anybody in this trade deadline, not named the Washington Wizards. The Los Angeles Lakers made the move for Mark Williams in Charlotte. Now, you say to yourself, Jake, Bud, listen, you're doing a sports talk radio program in Indianapolis, Indiana. I want to hear about IU. I want to hear about Purdue. I want to hear about the Colts. I want to hear about the Pacers. I don't care about a guy from Duke getting traded from the most random and anonymous team in the NBA in the Charlotte Hornets and now suddenly becoming an LA Laker. I understand. But here's the thing. The Lakers had said they were in the market for a rim protector. They needed a center and a rim protector. And Rob Pelinka, the guy running the show for the Lakers, and yes, Rob Pelinka was the one upperclassman that got minutes with the Fab Five, that guy. Rob Pelinka comes out when they traded for Luka Doncic and when they sent Anthony Davis out and said, we are in the market for a defensive rim-protecting center. And everybody in Indiana went, here we go. See, there have been rumors about Miles Turner going to the Lakers since the beginning of time, since the absolute beginning of time. And lo and behold, they come out and say, there's not a huge market for centers, and people thought they're bluffing. They've got to deal with Indiana. Miles Turner sat out the other night. That's not good. When they were in Utah, he was in street clothes. It's because they know he's going to get traded. Then he played against Portland. You're like, well, maybe not. Maybe he really was hurt. Folks, I'm telling you, Miles Turner, and I don't know whether Miles Turner re-signs here or not. And it is entirely possible between now and the next 4 hours that Miles Turner suddenly, because you always make a deal if it makes your team better. But the Pacers never set out to trade Miles Turner. And I think the Pacers would like to retain Miles Turner, certainly the upper brass of the Pacers, and by that I mean at the very top. Herb Simon, I think they would love to retain Miles Turner, but there's a lot that goes into that. But they don't have to worry about that for right now until the end of the year when his free agency kicks in. With the deal that Los Angeles did, I think that shows that door can be shut. Like Al Capone's vault, that can be shut. And we can turn the page on that. But it's not to say it won't be a topic of discussion over the course of today. Tony East going to join us 1 o'clock, and we'll go over not only what the Pacers are getting set to do tonight against the Clippers, but also trade deadline in general. Tony's going to be busy, so we'll probably just get the nuts and bolts from him. But the other thing, too, when it comes to Al Capone's vault is the anticipation and the waiting, the expectation, the hope when it comes to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And we've been waiting in Indianapolis now for a couple of years for Reggie Wayne to get the call. And when they do tonight at the NFL awards program, the way they do it, and they always wait, by the way, the show starts at 9. You won't know until like 10:45 probably, because they usually do this at the very end. And last year, that's how we found out that Dwight Freeney had made it into the Hall of Fame. There are 15 modern era finalists, of which 5 will get that knock on the door. And I don't know, I don't think it's that big fellow that looks like Shrek anymore, right? Isn't it a different director now for the Hall of Fame?
Seems
like a super nice dude, man. I mean, like, really does seem like a good guy. The guy that's the director of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But either way, if you look at, and this is something that I certainly understand people's argument and debate and discussion, and that is if a player doesn't get in one year and then gets in 4 years later, it's like, well, how are they better now than they were 3 years ago?
David Baker.
Is he still the guy that knocks on the door?
They do it differently now. Remember last year when Dwight Freeney found out, or whenever it was, he found out he was going to the golf club, and he was going to golf with Michael Jordan.
Yeah, but
and then they had Tony Dungy there, and then they presented him with a video. I think they do it video style now.
The thing about the knock on the door, though, like, wouldn't it be kind of obvious if you're like, hey, hon, I'm going to run out to, Kroger real quick and get something? Like, no. I can't say why, but you need to be home. It'd be a little obvious, right?
Yeah.
Here are the finalists, and this is the problem. I'm just going to read you the finalist list, and then we'll do this Eddie Garrison style. You ready?
Okay.
I'm going to read you the list of finalists, and if I read off a name that you automatically think is a right now, no doubt about it, Hall of Famer, I want you to simply ring the bell. Okay? You don't have to do an X, but if you say, yeah, they are in right now, you ring the bell.
Are we talking about for this upcoming class?
I'm talking about for right now.
Okay.
When I say their name, are they a Hall of – do you think to yourself they're going to get in? Okay? Cornerback Eric Allen.
I have no idea who he is, so I can't answer yes or no.
Okay, he was a great player. Defensive end, obviously, right? Defensive end, Eric Allen primarily, I'm thinking Philadelphia primarily. I'm probably going to
New Orleans, it looks like.
The corner?
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking it was Eric Allen from Philly. Well, see, shows what I know, right? Jared Allen, defensive end. Okay. Willie Anderson, offensive tackle.
See, I always have trouble with tackles and linemen.
Hard to argue that. Including the next one, Jari Evans, who was a really good player, primarily for New Orleans, was on the Super Bowl team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Antonio Gates, tight end. Torrey Holt, wide receiver. Luke Kuechly, linebacker from Carolina. You don't think so?
This is a good debate. I think he is Hall of Fame worthy. I don't know if he gets in this year just because of the longevity.
Fair. Okay, Eli Manning. Only one quarterback with multiple Super Bowl wins as a starter is not in. Jim Plunkett. Eli Manning has 2. Steve Smith, wide receiver. Terrell Suggs, outside linebacker, defensive end. Fred Taylor, running back. Adam Vinatieri, kicker. Reggie Wayne, wide receiver. You got it! Darren Woodson, safety. Marshall Yanda, again, back to guard tackle, right?
Just because I was 4 years old when his career ended.
Understood. Now, here's the problem, Eddie. You just said an emphatic yes to 7, and only 5 can get in. And you didn't include Eli Manning.
I know. I was saying that those were the 7 that I think could get in.
No, I understand. Yeah. What I'm saying is that it adds up very, very quickly. And my concern for Reggie Wayne would be simply this, and that is that, and it does seem odd. I mean, like when you're kind of waiting in line, and I believe this the first or second year of eligibility for Torrey Holt? Because he's been discussed for quite some time now, right? Yeah. And Torrey Holt, look, I covered Torrey Holt. By the way, Eric Allen was Eagles, Saints, and Raiders. I think Eric Allen is probably in. But nonetheless, here's the point on Reggie Wayne. Reggie Wayne, to me...
5th year in a row for Torrey Holt as a finalist.
Okay, I was going to say, because people... And how many years is it for Reggie now?
Is this 6?
Because I think Reggie came in the year before Torrey Holt of eligibility. I'm talking about eligibility-wise because he played longer. Or, excuse me, because Holt was younger, and came in later. But either way, Torrey Holt and Reggie Wayne are very similar players. And I covered the careers, not in totality for Torrey Holt, but the vast majority of Reggie Wayne's career I covered. And, I covered Torrey Holt, who I guess Holt came into the league before Reggie, but Reggie stayed longer, I believe. But either way, Reggie Wayne came in as essentially thought to be a possession-style receiver. And because he was the all-time leading receiver in receptions for Miami in college, etc. And then once it clicked for him, and he came into an offense that had obviously weapons galore, including Marvin Harrison. So you would demerit, if you will, well, Reggie Wayne, though, he had a Hall of Famer on the other side that drew away. He also had a Hall of Fame quarterback throwing to him. And then he had another one in Andrew Luck. Okay. He had a Hall of Fame running back. But look at Torrey Holt. I was covering the Rams, and I was in St. Louis when Torrey Holt was drafted and got his legs out underneath him and got going as a player as well. And he had Isaac Bruce. Isaac Bruce is not as known, obviously, as Marvin Harrison, but was just as great a player. I mean, Isaac Bruce, because they were very similar. Quiet guys, didn't like doing interviews, didn't like the limelight. Similar guys. But a huge benefit to be able to have on the opposite side for both of those guys, right? It goes without saying. And in addition to that, huge numbers in their prime, big-time numbers. The thing to me that sets Reggie Wayne apart is, in fact, that he was able to redefine himself as a receiver, I think more so than was Torrey Holt. And Torrey Holt had Kurt Warner throwing the ball. He had Marshall Faulk behind Kurt Warner. He had Isaac Bruce on the other side. He had Ernie Conwell. He had really good players around him. Ricky Prohl, really good players around him. But so too did Reggie Wayne. But for me, the thing that tips the scales to Reggie Wayne is this, and that is when Reggie Wayne's career started to wind down in terms of his body, and he had a change in quarterback from Peyton Manning into Andrew Luck, and Andrew Luck had arguably the best rookie season for a quarterback in the history of the league, people forget how much of Andrew Luck's rookie year is because of the security blanket, the reliability, the leadership of Reggie Wayne in every way, shape, or form. And I know it. I mean, I was doing a radio show at that time with Reggie Wayne. I knew what time he got up in the morning and what he was doing, and I'm not saying Torrey Holt didn't do those things. And I'm not saying that Steve Smith didn't do those things. But Reggie Wayne extended his career by probably an extra 2 to 3 years by accepting and excelling in a defined role that was different than the one with which he was playing in his prime. And to me, that's the difference. There are a lot of people that say, well, this guy's a Hall of Famer just because of longevity. Jim Thome was a great player, but he only hit 600 home runs because he played forever. I mean, I'm just generically throwing a name out there. But in baseball in particular, there are a lot of people that feel like pitchers, for example, when it comes to strikeout totals or total wins, that those things are embellished based on longevity. And I don't look at it that way as much as in the case of Reggie Wayne, it was longevity because he was carrying the torch from one quarterback to the next and was the focal point of that. But then you look at that list and it becomes difficult. If Wayne is in now, why wasn't he in a year ago? Why wasn't he in there? And the same with Holt. And in addition to that, do they do the whole thing of like, well, but this guy's waited longer? You're either a Hall of Famer or you're not. Now the other Colt obviously in there is Adam Vinatieri. And I think Adam Vinatieri's in. I think Adam Vinatieri right now is in. Because he is indisputably the greatest kicker of all time. But he feels a little bit different. The difference between Reggie Wayne and Adam Vinatieri, Reggie Wayne plays his whole career as a Colt, goes out by signing with New England. Adam Vinatieri plays with New England, comes to Indianapolis. Now, becomes the all-time leading scorer while in Indianapolis. Hits big kicks while in Indianapolis. But also with Adam Vinatieri, we saw his decline before our very eyes in Indianapolis. And let's be real, Vinatieri, to me, and yes, a Hall of Famer. And for those that are confused by this, it's a very common misunderstanding. But, Eddie, I'll put it to you in trivia form. Is Peyton Manning in the Hall of Fame as a Bronco or a Colt?
Isn't he both?
Correct. Well done. In the Hall of Fame, in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, you go in with simply your bust, and then underneath it, your teams of service and the years of it. But it feels to me like most fans, and maybe I'm wrong in this. Maybe I'm wrong, and there are times where I completely misread the audience of Indianapolis, perhaps. But it feels to me like most people in Indianapolis think first and foremost of Adam Vinatieri as being a Colt, yes, but I think most of them know that his finest moments came as a Patriot, and that they feel like he was still kind of, when you look back now at his career, you think to yourself, like, it was great that he was a Colt and I loved him, but he was always kind of on loan from New England. Does that sound too extreme?
No.
Am I way off base there?
No, when you think of Vinatieri's biggest moments, you think of him as
and you are correct.
Patriot.
It is Vinatieri, by the way. You know that I've always said that, right?
Uh-huh.
He once told me it's Vinatieri, right? But yes, I think Vinatieri goes in, though. And I say Vinatieri because, obviously, from a colloquial standpoint, that is who he is now. By the way, coming up just a couple minutes from now, big show lined up for you. We'll talk more about this. James Boyd going to join us just under 10 minutes from now. Tony East and Zack Keefer also on today's program. And great IHSA conversation with a young man just a couple of minutes from now down from North Harrison, who is a leader amongst his school. And before I get to that, I wanted to pass this along. I wanted to make mention of this. One of the challenges of, quite frankly, just of life in general is, and one of the benefits of living in the same area for a long time is that you get to be enriched. You get to have your life touched by people in different capacities over the course of a very long time. And for me and countless numbers of people in Indianapolis, that applies to two individuals. Rick Shadio was a baseball coach at North Central. His wife, Carla Shadio, was a teacher for a very long time within Washington Township. She was my 8th grade English teacher. She introduced me to Watership Down, which is the greatest book that I've ever read. And Rick and Carla Shadio were the definition of a love story and an example for all people. My oldest sister had Mrs. Shadio when she and Rick Shadio began dating. At that time, he also was a teacher, and people loved the love story of the two of them. And Rick Shadio, who then went on to coach baseball at North Central, took them to the 1993, I believe, semi-state in baseball, and was the absolute definition of doing things the right way, setting by example, showing the example of leadership, of going about things with a strong conviction of faith, treating everyone equally, and guiding by example, including the example of loyalty, love, friendship, and marriage between he and Carla Shadio. And Rick has been battling a number of health ailments for the last nearly decade between cancer and other challenges, and passed away just within the last few days. And I have personally been blessed with and fortunate enough to see the loyalty and the strength that both Rick and Carla showed throughout that journey. And my life is better for having known both of them, but also enriched by seeing the example of what it means to stand by someone because of a vow and a strength between two people. Shortly after Rick Shadio's passing, Chuck Belkey, who was a women's basketball coach at North Central, he was the PE teacher at Allisonville Elementary School when I was a kid. And he is a guy that's been a staple on the north side of Indianapolis. His wife, Linda, has been battling Huntington's disease for quite some time. Their daughter, Mindy, was a year younger than me at North Central. She passed away tragically when we were younger adults, but their son, Kevin, was a year ahead of me, but, you know, a schoolmate and a very good dude, baseball player in his own right. And that's another example when I would go out in the community and I would see Chuck Belkey, Mr. Belkey, as I called him. And it was very apparent that Linda was going through health challenges, but the strength, the loyalty, and the commitment that he showed in standing by her and helping her, as you do, obviously, with the person that is your person. But even though we know that those are the roles that are defined and those are the roles that are expected throughout this life that we live, no matter how old you are, you can always learn from seeing the example set by those who either by design, either by the choice of their career, or just by their lifestyle, set that example of the way that you should and would want to live your life and treat those around you. And so for Chuck Belkey, my condolences and heart goes out for the passing of his wife, Linda. And for Rick Shadio, my thanks, and also my thanks to Carla for the example that he set and the model that he was, and that Chuck Belkey was towards Linda, and Linda as well. I didn't know Linda, obviously, as well. But condolences for all, and I know I speak for all, and I apologize for speaking esoterically about a small slice of geographically Indianapolis, but I think it applies to all in whichever school district or whichever area of this great city you grew up. I hope that your life is enriched with the same sets of example and people before you. James Boyd in just under 10, little IHSAA chat in just a couple minutes here on Query & Company. Past halfway through the 12 o'clock hour. Jay Query along with Eddie Garrison here, Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Joining us now in the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line on a very obviously news-filled week for the National Football League, James Boyd from The Athletic. James, we'll get to the Colts and kind of where they stand in just a moment. I wanted to get to the conversation that Eddie and I just had regarding the Hall of Fame, because there's not one but two members of the Colts family that are awaiting tonight to find out whether or not they get in. There are 15 finalists in the modern era. 5 will hear their name called. Reggie Wayne and Adam Vinatieri both are awaiting that word. Your thoughts on whether we're going to see 0, 1, or 2 representatives from the Colts in the Hall of Fame class?
What a great question. I think that we're probably going to see 1, and that'll be Adam Vinatieri, because he's made his name during this week. Super Bowl week, Super Bowl games. He's made a lot of huge kicks, and obviously many consider him to be the greatest kicker of all time. Now, with that in mind, I know that might make Reggie Wayne and others very mad, but when you look at this class and how it's kind of gone in the past, it seems like he does get the short end of the stick whenever he's up against other wide receivers who might have comparable stats to his or comparable careers. And it feels like he's never right in that spot to get the love he deserves. So it pains you to say that, but looking at the list, see the 5 guys, I mean, Antonio Gates, he's probably getting in. Eli Manning's a big one, big name. He might get in. Adam Vinatieri, and then after that, it gets dicey to me. And so I believe he is a Hall of Fame wide receiver. I just don't know if he gets in this year.
Now, and here's the thing about Reggie Wayne that we were just talking about, James. If you compare him, for example, Torrey Holt or Steve Smith, either one, right? I know that part of the knock on Reggie Wayne is, whether people want to admit it or not, in the back of them, and I don't mean in Indianapolis. I mean a guy that you know is working in L.A. or Vegas, or, you know, an NFL writer in Buffalo, whatever. When they hear Reggie Wayne, they think, well, yeah, but he played alongside, you know, Marvin Harrison. He played alongside Edgerrin James. He had Peyton Manning. But Torrey Holt had Isaac Bruce, had Marshall Faulk, had Kurt Warner. To me, it kind of comes out in the wash. Yet, for whatever reason, it feels to me like Torrey Holt is the one that I hear more often than not being mentioned above Reggie Wayne. And then you throw in Steve Smith, who, you know, Smith was a dynamic player as well. It almost feels, unfortunately, like Reggie Wayne just annually becomes victim to a numbers game. You agree with that?
Yeah, that's basically my assessment of it, and it's tough to, again, get on him about that. And when you look at, okay, maybe he did have Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe he did have other talent around him, but I think that the thing that should push Reggie over the top, and that I think that goes under the radar, is his playoff performances. He's 7th all-time in receiving yards in the playoffs, and he had some of his best games when it mattered the most. And so if this is the Hall of Fame and you make your name in the playoffs and in these big games, how do you not put Reggie Wayne in that conversation? And so, and part of it too, maybe, and I talked to Mike Chappell about this, the dean, is it that feeling of they should have won more with all the talent they had during the Peyton Manning era? If they win 2 Super Bowls, does he wait this long? And so all of that is, you know, ifs and whats and things like that. But it just feels like it's a bit disingenuous when, you know, I'm looking at Reggie Wayne's resume and you're saying, okay, I get it. He's up against Torrey Holt. He's up against, you know, Steve Smith. But he's just as good, if not better than all these guys.
The other thing that comes into play, you got guys that feel like slam dunks. I actually think, and James, this is an interesting one, I think Eli Manning's going to get in. I think his numbers merit getting in, but I think he's thought of as like an automatic to get in. And I'll be honest, if his name is Eli Boyd or Eli Query, and he did the same thing, and I know that he had, you know, remarkable runs in the playoffs themselves. He was big in big games, but at the same time, his last name is Manning. It's football royalty, and he is still very relevant and topical and on the forefront of people's minds, maybe even more so now than when he was playing. To me, that gets him in.
Yeah, I think it's huge. It obviously helps, as you alluded to, that he's a quarterback too, and quarterbacks are just more popular in general. I mean, how many people believe or remember, you know, Luke Kuechly versus Eli Manning, or Terrell Suggs versus Eli Manning, or Fred Taylor versus Eli Manning? And so when I'm looking at this list, I'm like, man, he's got, again, I believe that he should be a Hall of Famer. I don't really care about the first ballot or second ballot or whatever. But I would say, looking at this list, my 3 locks to get in are probably Eli Manning, Adam Vinatieri, and Antonio Gates. Now, the other two spots, we will see how it all kind of breaks down. But to me, it comes down to, can Reggie get one of those last two spots to get in and finally get the recognition he deserves? And I know he'll be waiting patiently to find out whether he gets that call. Oftentimes, we see the videos, the knock on the door, and let him know that he's officially in the Hall of Fame.
I'm going to go, by the way, with the other two. I don't disagree with your list there. I think Willie Anderson is a strong candidate. But I will say Eric Allen. I'll say Eric Allen, and I will say Terrell Suggs. Although I don't know that Suggs gets in over Jared Allen, but I'll say Suggs and Allen. But, I mean, they're finalists for a reason, right? All right, let's switch to this, James, in terms of getting set for the Super Bowl. When you look, it's a copycat league, always has been. And when you look at the style of play of Kansas City and Philly, both of them, big playmakers in space, fast guys, good defenses, especially in Philadelphia's standpoint. What does Indianapolis have to do to be able – can they actually, with tweaks, and whether it be through free agency, whether it be through the draft, are they close enough from a speed and space style of play, or do they not want to change that style?
I don't think they need to change their style of play or that they want to change their style of play. I just think they're further away than some people might want to admit. And I think it's because of the quarterback, quite honestly. You look at the quarterback play with both teams. You can talk about space. You can talk about playmakers. You can talk about offensive lines. But at the end of the day, those guys make throws. They make big-time throws. And I've been thinking back to that Washington Commanders game. I know the Eagles blew out the Commanders, but there was a moment in that game where it was kind of tight. I believe it was like 4th and 5, and Jalen Hurts was a money ball down the sideline to A.J. Brown on one-on-one coverage. And it's like you got to make those throws to be the guy. And I don't know if Anthony Richardson has proven it. He hasn't proven it so far, or if he can be that guy in year 3. So we'll see. I think that they can scheme up some things. I think that their offense is okay at times. The wide receiver core is fine. It just all comes back to the quarterback, and can he be consistent enough for you to have legitimate functioning offense in the modern NFL, which, again, it's cool if you lean on the run. The Eagles lean on the run probably better than any team in the league, but when it comes down to making plays, Jalen Hurts has proven he can make some of these throws. And granted, he also has, 2 of the best receivers in the world to throw to, which helps a little bit, and a tight end that's also a little bit useful in the passing game, which is what the Colts need this coming year for sure.
Is Myles Garrett a guy – listen, the Colts, amongst any franchise, know how destructive Myles Garrett can be. Myles Garrett has now said he wants out of Cleveland. Saying it's one thing, being able to actually facilitate for that for any franchise is another. Would the Colts even take a look that way?
I think you should. I probably would say no. I wouldn't, mortgage my future for him, especially considering that he wants to, quote unquote, win now.
Right.
So even though he doesn't have like a no trade clause or whatever, it's like you don't want to trade for a guy who might be disgruntled if he gets here. I threw it out on The Athletic the other day. If the Colts were to make a trade, my proposal was this year's first-round pick, next year's first-round pick, and Kwity Paye, because he's on an expiring contract, and he's a pretty decent player if you want to get something back in return. But even then, I just feel like it's kind of one of those things where if you are, let's say, the Bills or you're a team that's, right on the cusp of trying to get there and get over the top, Detroit, Green Bay, something like that, then maybe you make that move. But for the Colts, I feel like you need to kind of recoup a lot of your assets and try to build as much infrastructure as you can around Anthony Richardson to help him succeed.
By the way, James, this is difficult to say, but I'm curious of this. I want your thoughts. Do you think other players around the league think of the Colts now as NFL Siberia? There are those franchises that you say, like, oh, man, they penalize that. Like, they send them to the Washington Wizards for crying out loud. Like, that's NBA Siberia. Is that what the Colts are?
No, I don't think it's that bleak. I think NFL Siberia is something like, the Raiders, where they're just, bad every year. The Jets, as of late, where they're just a mess every year. The Giants, something like that. Or maybe I'm just thinking more big market or bigger city teams. But I will say I don't think that Indianapolis is a sexy location by any means. I don't think that you can really attract a lot of guys unless you're able to sell them on, the future, or just a big bag of money, which is probably what they're going to have to spend in free agency to get, good players to come here. But no, I don't think that anybody's like looking at their agent and saying, get me to Indianapolis, because the years of Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck to a lesser degree are over, and they're long gone. And the biggest question mark with any team when it comes to their success is their quarterback. And as long as you don't have that figured out, you're going to be Siberia, I guess, esque, if that makes sense.
James, finally, tell me what's going on with The Athletic in terms of your upcoming pieces. I know you've got a lot in terms of free agency and how it relates to Indianapolis.
Absolutely. We had a piece come out, I believe, yesterday, which was my first big board. So check that out. 10 players the coach should look at in the draft. We had safeties. We had, tight ends. We had defensive linemen. Yes, Tyler Warren was on the list for those listening. And then I have another story coming out pretty soon here about free agents to target. And so some of those names will be interesting to, dive into, think about, if Chris Ballard is serious about spending money, then let's go out here and spend some of that on guys who can be difference makers, not somebody who's, you kind of know what he brings. No, they're a playmaker. They make a difference. So bring those guys in. And then right now I'm working on a piece about cap casualties and who the Colts can move on from a financial standpoint to recoup some cap space and, potentially use that for other spending in other areas.
Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line is where you hear the voice of James Boyd, The Athletic, where you can read his work. James, appreciate it. Enjoy the game on Sunday. And as I always say, they will call heads, it will be tails, and the winning team will defer. Just lock that in. You can put that in The Athletic.
That sounds good. I'll make sure the first instance in my story today for sure.
That's right. James, appreciate it, man.
All right, you have a good one.
All right, James Boyd joining us. We haven't talked a lot about the Super Bowl. Haven't talked a lot about it, Eddie. We might have to end that streak. We'll do it next. News just coming out of Chicago, I think within the last hour or so, correct, Eddie?
Yeah, this is within the last 10 minutes.
Virginia McCaskey, of course, the maiden name of Hallis, passing away in Chicago at the age of 102, presumably in the city of Chicago, but 102 years old, the principal owner of the Chicago Bears. Of course, she is the daughter of Papa Bear Hallis, George Hallis, who took over ownership, she did, in 1983 when George Halas passed away. Of course, that would be the reason why the 84 Bears have his initials on the shoulder. But Virginia Halas McCaskey passing away. I know a lot of Bears fans in the area at the age of 102. All right, Eddie, Super Bowl coming up on Sunday and down in New Orleans. Look, the storyline is going to obviously be, the fact that the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes are going for 3 straight. They are the first Super Bowl team to have won back-to-back Super Bowls and then make it to the Super Bowl for a chance at a three-peat. There have been teams, I believe, that have made 3 straight, but not to win 3 straight. Obviously, they're the first with a chance for the three-peat, would be the first to do so. But it seems to me like we're kind of sleeping on the Eagles because there's so much talk about, and understandably so, there's so much talk about Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift and Kansas City just – and this happens with teams. It's remarkable to me. The Patriots felt like this way for a long time, where every single time a marquee free agent or somebody who had been a great player was available to see if they could squeeze a last drop out of their career, or all of a sudden things went awry with their team. I'm talking about DeAndre Hopkins in this example. But it seems like Kansas City is the team. It's like, do they not have a salary cap? They just seemingly, whenever anybody's available, it's like, well, they're going and signing with Kansas City. They have weapons all over the place.
It's the contract that Patrick Mahomes is on. It is such a steal for the Kansas City Chiefs for what they have him at. He's not within the top 10 players paid at the position. It's just ridiculous about the amount of money they save because of that. So it allows them to sign Chris Jones. It allows them to sign guys up front on the offensive line.
And you know what? And does that mean that Mahomes was duped or he's smart, right? It's one of the two.
Because it was a 10-year deal.
I remember that.
So it was one of the longer deals in NFL history.
And you see so often in sports when players sign those big-time deals, at the time you're like, man, and then you think, well, that's going to be a bargain by the end of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as crazy as it sounds, even like Ohtani, I realize that that's kind of weird because the way they deferred it and that kind of thing. But who was it that just signed a 10-year deal? I'm trying to think of who it was.
Juan Soto?
Juan Soto, that's a good one, yeah. And you're like, by the end of – now the Soto one's a little bit different with the Mets because with the Mets, because by the end of it, you're like, they're going to be looking to unload that deal, right? I mean, so often in baseball, I remember – and we'll get back to the Super Bowl in a second, but I've told this before. I was covering the Cardinals when Alex Rodriguez signed the first real mega deal in baseball, and it was a 10-year, if I'm not mistaken, $250 million deal with the Rangers, and that was unheard of, right? And literally, this was Twitter days or whatever, but I happened to be down at spring training in Jupiter, Florida with the Cardinals, and when that word came out, not just me. I mean, there were a couple of us reporters that were standing around, but we were with McGuire. Mark McGuire was coming back from a patellar tendonitis, and he was the big story. So we're all standing around him, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh! What do you think of the Rodriguez contract?" And he said, "What I think is I better never hear them complain about how they can't win because they can't sign anybody else." I'm like, "Yeah." I mean, and that's been true. And lo and behold, and Rodriguez is one of the great players of all time. But lo and behold, even that, I think if you look at it, by the end of his tenure in Texas, they were looking to unload from that contract. But back to the point, so Kansas City has all of these weapons, and we talk so much about Mahomes and, Chris Jones, for example, and they just always seem to push the right button. Literally every single time they are finagled into a corner, they manage to find their way out of it in virtually unscathed. But the other side of that is Philadelphia, who I feel like we haven't given enough credit. Saquon Barkley's been a great story. Barkley was a guy that coming out of Penn State, I mean, we know the story, right? It was this guy is unbelievable. He should have won the Heisman. He's one of the great, he's Barry Sanders part deux, but with maybe even more bulk. And in New York, in the Giants, I mean, who knows what the Giants were thinking in terms of just letting him go in free agency as opposed to recouping something for him. But nonetheless, he has been certainly reborn in Philadelphia, maybe even just born in Philadelphia. But there's more than that. I think Jalen Hurts, we forget about the high level of play now consistently that Jalen Hurts has turned in, but their defense in as well,
Incredible.
right?
Incredible. What Howie Roseman has done there with Jalen Carter falling to them in the first round, and Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell this past draft, they find Zach Bond on the practice squad for the New Orleans Saints, and now he's a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Darius Slay, they've got guys all over the field at all the levels that can just make plays. And Howie Roseman has been on an absolute tear lately with the contracts that he's been able to sign players to and just the trades that he's been able to pull off and how many hits he has in the NFL draft.
Now, where do things stand right now in terms of the line? I'm going to get, is it Kansas City 3.5?
No.
Has the line moved at all?
1.5.
That's
so
a
it hasn't
pick'em.
moved.
That's a pick'em, right?
Yep.
I mean, that and for the sentimental, and sentimental is the wrong word. The conventional wisdom favorite is Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly, the between the lines favorite is a pick'em, basically. I mean, you go with Kansas City because they've been there before, right? And I know Philly has too in terms of playing in the game, but I'm telling you.
So, Jake, you said the team that wins the toss will win the Super Bowl?
No. Whoever wins the toss will defer. So here's the way it'll happen. And I go back and forth on this a lot. Sometimes, and I haven't gotten a strong vibe on this. In the past, a lot of times, it just hits me. And I'm like, this is exactly what's going to happen. And I feel this time like I'm a little bit off. I actually think, and this is my final answer on this, I've gone back and forth a lot, kind of like a coin flip. I think it's going to be the team that is asked to call is going to call tails. It is going to land heads. So then the team that is allowed to pick is going to defer and opt to kick off and take the ball to start the second half, which I think is the smart play anyway.
Do you think that team wins?
I don't know because I can tell you who I think is going to win the game, and I don't know which side of the coin flip they'll be on. The coin flip, to me, does not in any way, shape, or form impact my thought on who's going to win the game.
Well, because, sportsbooks offer wild props for the Super Bowl.
Is that one of the props?
There's one that is to win the coin toss and the game. And if you think it's Kansas City Chiefs that'll win the toss and the game, they're plus 260. And if you think it's the Eagles, they're plus 310.
Decent parlay for sure. I'm embarrassed to have to ask this because I forget who is singing the anthem on Sunday.
Give me 1 second.
I should know this. Kendrick Lamar, is he doing the
John Baptiste?
That's who's doing the anthem?
Yes.
Okay.
And Kendrick Lamar is the halftime show.
So here's the thing. Isn't one of the prop bets how long the national anthem's going to be? Isn't that always a prop bet?
Usually.
So what stops? There's probably a maximum you can wager on that, correct? Is it like you can only do like a $50 wager or something?
Just depends on the sports book.
Because wouldn't it seem kind of odd if all of a sudden some guy walks in and goes, "I'm going to put $150,000 on the anthem length"? Because if it's somebody that, like, let's say that you are a guy who your next door neighbor is the father of the mailman.
Oh my goodness!
For the anthem performer, and so you are distant enough away that nobody realizes that you know the anthem performer, but you have access to it. Couldn't you say, "Listen, you want to make $50,000 real quick"?
They have a brotherly shove prop.
Excuse me?
For the number of first downs by the brotherly shove for Jalen Hurts. 2.5.
That's actually something you can wager on.
Yes.
Okay. There was a lot of wagering on whether or not Miles Turner was going to be a Laker by this time next week, even by this time of the Super Bowl. And it looks like that might have already gone by the wayside. We told you that was going to be the case. But trade deadline still has a couple of hours left. Tony East going to join us just a couple of minutes. We will go over that and preview Pacers clips next. By the way, should you happen to see out and about, my sister, Coach Q, as she was known at Lawrence Central High School, or just simply Q, Jennifer, as she's known professionally, and Juge, as she's known to those who know her best. If you see her out and about today and you happen to know her, wish her a happy birthday. Today's the birthday of Ronald Reagan. Today's the birthday of Bob Marley. Today's the birthday of Axl Rose.
Wasn't it just your sister's birthday the other day as well?
My other sister Megan's birthday is the 3rd, yes. Megan's the middle. Juge is the oldest. I'm the baby. I know that's shocking. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line and squeezing in as he is actively watching the waiver wires, if we want to call it that, not waiver wires, but trade wires. Tony East joining us to talk about the trade deadline. Tony, let's begin with this. I don't think that anybody anticipated seismic moves from Indiana, so we were talking about the possibility that they could do one of their typical like trade deadline, pick up a second-round pick or, quote-unquote draft capital, that kind of thing. Do you anticipate that Indiana will be active in any way, shape, or form here over the next couple of hours?
I mean, they could certainly use some money clearing if possible, but that would be something not necessarily seismic or significant in a way that, requires a ton of discussion. If they can find a taker for James Wiseman using some cash, maybe they would do that. If they could find a cheaper replacement for someone else who either isn't playing or doesn't play very much, maybe they would do so. But no, not really. They're playing very well. Their team makes sense. If they have issues in the postseason or down the stretch, they have much more flexibility in the summer to figure that stuff out. So I'd be surprised if something major happens, but something smaller does make sense for them.
Tony East, by the way, at Tony R. East on the X Post Twitter, of course, Locked On Pacers, where you can hear him. You can also read him at Forbes, amongst other places. Tony, when you look at exactly what you're talking about, the financials of it, the bottom line is that the Pacers right now, I think, from a basketball standpoint, have a really good roster and a roster that has a lot of cohesiveness to it. But are they kind of is this like a credit card bill that is due, but you can buy yourself an extra 4 or 5 months? They're still going to have to, are they not, get a little bit creative, in particular if they want Miles Turner to resign theoretically, and I think they are willing to go into the luxury tax. I do believe that, but not for long term. Do they still have a little bit of maneuvering that they have to get creative with at some point here?
Yeah, this summer, if they're willing to go into the tax, that'd be great. And next season, the luxury tax structure in the league actually changes, and it becomes less damaging for teams that are barely over the tax line to actually pay the tax. Now, they still wouldn't get the distribution from actual tax-paying teams, but that does help a team like the Pacers, who is good and has a roster that makes sense, to say, yeah, you know what, let's do this, right? If they actually wanted to do so. If they aren't going to, or they see that Phoenix and Boston are going to pay an abhorrent amount that they could, get a distribution, yeah, they certainly have to think about their money savings at some point, whether that's shedding someone completely or not re-signing someone or moving around their draft pick timing, others, because Andrew Nemhard's raise kicks in next year. If they keep Turner, he'll get a raise next year. The next year after that, Benedict Mathurin will be up, for a raise. And who knows what Isaiah Jackson's next contract looks like, right? So there's a lot of guys, and this is a reaction to having a good team that wins a lot of games, is you have good players, and those players want to be paid fairly for being good at basketball. And that's great for the Pacers that it worked out when a lot of their players were cheap or on rookie deals, or they found them at a good time in their contractual life. But it does come, like you said, with the credit card analysis, it does come due at some point, and they are, within the 12-month period, I'd say, where they have to really figure out all that and get it all squared away. So they don't have to do anything right now. They're under the tax for this season with their presently good team, but some flexibility would be nice for a team that, if they hit the playoffs, could have as many as 3 roster spots taken up by guys that they don't expect to contribute at all in the postseason, and Wiseman and Isaiah Jackson and James Johnson. And maybe that's fine, but the Pacers saw last year with their opponents what, injuries can decimate a team that doesn't have a full team and doesn't have the right replacements and depth. So perhaps they look for some flexibility today. Perhaps they look for some flexibility in the summer. But if they're willing to start paying the tax as soon as next year, then this all could be a lot easier for them.
Tony, which team has been the most savvy in this trade deadline, and which team was expected to be more active, like Indiana, and so far has not really been involved in anything?
Yeah, that's a good question. Savvy, I think the Miami Heat did very well in the Jimmy Butler trade. I mean, to get anything, I think, is telling. Like, he was going to be a zero for them the rest of this season. And I know it's easy to trade a star and get stuff back, but to get a good player in Wiggins and good picks and then keep flipping the players they got for other good stuff, I really like what they did. Turns out, Jake, Pat Riley is pretty good at basketball stuff. I don't know if you knew that from his years of experience, but I think he did a really good job in those moves. I give a lot of credit to Philly. This sounds kind of danging with fate praise, but to pivot hard directions in the middle of a season that's lost, it's really hard for front offices to do. Like, you spend a whole summer going one direction. You want to believe in the direction and the choices you made. And Philly was very aggressive buyers and made some huge improvements in the offseason. So recognize that they're having a bad year and be willing to sell off Reggie Jackson and be willing to sell off Caleb Martin and be facilitators in other ways. I think that's really savvy and shrewd. I don't know what people expected from their activity, but I really thought that was impressive. As for teams that have been quieter than people thought, I don't know that there's a ton. Portland maybe stands out, although the thing that's different for them is the Pacers just found out is they're playing awesome recently. Like, they have to figure out what direction they're going. I think a lot of people thought they'd be more sellers than they have been.
Yeah, they got some good young players, though, don't they?
They do, and they all come off the bench. I think that's such a weird dynamic of their team. But, again, when you've won 9 of 10, you don't have to apologize. So I think that some of the expectations for this deadline just got flipped on its head when it was like, oh, maybe Kevin Durant's available. Wait, Luka Doncic just got traded? You know, it's just insane out of nowhere. I don't know many people who, as recently as 2 weeks ago, thought the Raptors were truly going to be buyers, but they just got Brandon Ingram. You know, it's just been a nuts couple days, and I think the cap's barely going up last summer. I think the apron's kicking in and all these complicated trades having to happen to make everything legal, I think it's just made for some chaos and some interesting chaos. And I'll give a lot of credit to a lot of cap guys around the league. It's been quite the week.
Okay, real quick, Tony, you mentioned Brandon Ingram. I only mention it because now he goes from the West to the East. He's been a good player in New Orleans, but has not played a lot. Is that because they knew, and I know he was hurt, is he still not playing because he was physically not available, or is it because they knew they were going to move him?
A little bit of both, I would say. You know, you want to be safe with those recoveries if guys get hurt again. I mean, you saw this with Wiggins. Like, the Warriors played last night, and they just straight up didn't play Andrew Wiggins because if he got hurt, that could really jeopardize their trades. You know, you take it slow with guys' recovery in that way at times with injuries, but, you know, they're also not trying to be good this year after, you know, the Achilles tear for Murray. Zion's been hurt. Ingram has been legitimately hurt at times this year. Like, it's been a factory of injuries in New Orleans. Like, they have the worst record in the West, so there's no point in rushing him back. It's going to be interesting to see how good the Raptors are. I mean, the Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam group wasn't particularly good. Is Ingram better than Siakam? No, or else they would have kept Siakam last year, right? So I'm very curious to see how good they actually are. If they chase the 10 seed this year, what their plan is, because that was one of the weirdest trades in the league to me. But maybe they think they can be good next year when they re-sign him. I'm not sure. That's probably the worst grade I'd give to a team. Maybe the Bucks.
Tony, trade deadline is what, 4:30 today?
2 hours.
3 o'clock. Okay, I was thinking it was 4:30 for some reason. Okay, so we've got an hour and 50 minutes left. We are, if anything, our eyes are still on what, or our ears are still listening for what? Is there anything left that is anticipated or of intrigue, or does it kind of feel like the waters have calmed down?
Yeah, all the biggest names have been agreed to or moved, it seems like, although there seems like there's a surprise or two every year. Maybe Luka was that surprise. I think Detroit's probably going to still get involved somewhere to use their cap space, and then they have to do some crazy ordering of their trades. So I'm keeping an eye on the Pistons as a team that could help facilitate someone else's trade or even do their own thing. I think the Cavs are sniffing around for wing upgrades. They're interesting to me, and the Grizzlies are interesting to me as contenders who haven't done anything yet, as some other teams have. But, a lot of, once the deals like Daniel Tice getting salary dumped and Jaden Springer getting salary dumped, those don't happen until most teams have a generally good idea of what they're going to do or how they're going to do it. And once those started kicking in yesterday, I thought, okay, most teams feel pretty good about where the deadline's going or where things are headed. So I would not anticipate – I don't know anything, but I would not anticipate any major, huge, talented players getting moved today. But this trade deadline has been nothing short of surprising at every turn. So perhaps there's more to come.
At Tony R. East on the X Post Twitter. He will have all of your coverage on what the NBA and the Pacers are going to do between now and 3 o'clock. And then, of course, even afterwards, talking about the Pacers and Clippers tonight, that game out in Los Angeles. Tony, we'll let you get back to work. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Tony East joining us on the program. By the way, when I said that the trade deadline was 4:30, it reminds me, kind of like the O.J. Mayo deal. The O.J. Mayo, and listen, believe you me, there is no, you want to talk about something that it turns out was the biggest, like, godsend of a mistake of all time.
Now, what deal are you referring to, Jake, for those that may not know?
So the Indiana Pacers, and I'm going off of the top of my head here, I believe it was Josh McRoberts that they had, and they were going to trade him for O.J. Mayo. I could be wrong in the players involved, but Indiana was trying to acquire O.J. Mayo, who was a talented and, big name, certainly coming out of high school, scorer, kind of a proverbial 20-25 guy, to be honest with you. And I hate to throw him under the bus here. David Morway, by all account, was at the time the general manager of the Pacers. Larry Bird was the president of basketball operations. And they decided to make the trade, and it was either that Indiana had to sign the paperwork and send it to the NBA or even submit the paperwork to the NBA by the trade deadline time for then, I think it was Memphis is where Mayo was at the time. And as it was reported at the time, the trade, while it was expected and anticipated and almost just mentioned as fact, the trade did not go through because allegedly the Pacers fax came in like 1 minute late, literally 1 minute late. And it's a fax, right? So, I mean, you think about that tells you it wasn't exactly a year ago. O.J. Mayo ended up getting, I believe, permanently banned from the league, was he not? For substance abuse. If he was not permanently banned, he got like a 5-year ban or something like that and never found his way back into the league. So it turned out to be, kind of a blessing, I guess, if you will. I mean, you hate to say that about a guy's misfortune in terms of his personal life, but that Indiana did not get involved with that.
Yeah, it was O.J. Mayo for Josh McRoberts in a 2011 first-round pick that fell apart.
And that was in what year was that supposed to take place?
2011.
It was 2011. Okay, I didn't know if it was a future first-rounder. For those that have asked or are curious, I looked this up the other day. In terms of future first-rounders, there is, I believe in the NBA, it is a 7-year limit. So you cannot trade a first-round pick after, beyond 7 years of the year of the trade itself. Now, that is unusual. That is longer than other leagues. I believe in the NFL, it is a 4-year max, and in Major League Baseball, I think it's 3 years. But the NBA has the longest. Now, does it mention there for O.J. Mayo, Eddie, whether or not it was a permanent ban that he received? I'm, which is unfortunate. I might be thinking of Tyreek Evans.
2 years. You're thinking of Tyreek Evans.
Tyreek Evans got a lifetime ban, did he not? A permanent ban?
It was either that or it was like 5 years or something like that.
I think Tyreek Evans might have violated even the 5 years. So O.J. Mayo only got 2 years.
So Evans was 2 years for violating the league's anti-drug policy when he's with the Pacers.
But then he was later received, I'm fairly certain on this, Tyreek Evans after that received a permanent ban beyond the one that he got when he was with the Pacers. He went and played after that overseas, I want to say, and then later. And I don't think it was a bad guy. I mean, he was really quiet. I think most people will tell you that when Tyreek Evans played here, he was a really quiet guy. In 2019, he was banned from the NBA for violating terms of its anti-drug program that prohibits drug abuse. He became eligible to play. Oh, you're right. Eligible for reinstatement in 2021, officially reinstated in 2022. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously he has most recently was in the G League and was waived in 2022 for Tyreek Evans. Now, you heard Tony mention that he didn't know, I think he said something like a team was going in one direction. That band One Direction, Eddie, is that a boy band or is that a thing? I know they're not now, but when they were at their peak, were they a boy band or were they like a cool band?
Boy band.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Didn't Anthony Costanzo go to their concert and stand in the front row? They were how
no
big
idea.
were they?
Oh, they were massive with especially teenage girls. My sister loved One Direction.
Really? Now,
Yeah.
okay, there is a band. I'm gonna describe for you the band of what I'm about to mention. I want you to tell me what band it is. You ready?
Okay, I'll try my best.
I'm going to guess on years here. The years all run together to me after a while, but I'm going to guess this was around.
It's because you're in the second half century of your life, Jake.
I know. Well, it's so weird. So last night I was watching, again, the insomnia kicked in. And I was watching an episode. I've never really watched it before, but it was an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents from 1958. And Carol Burnett was in it. She was like 29 years old or something, 25 years old. And there was another guy in it. And I actually took a picture of the screen because I'm like, look at this guy. Guy looked 65, 70 years old. Of course, it's in black and white film. That probably didn't help. And then I look it up. He was 44.
Did you send it to J&V and have him guess?
No, I just wanted to see. I was looking at it, and I'm like, wait a minute. And this is what is so, like, sobering. Is I look at something like that, and I'm like, this dude is 10 years younger than I am right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that guy looks like everybody was smoking back then, man. Like, literally, back in those days, you walked in anywhere, and you were instantly in just an ashtray, and your skin turned to leather by the time you were 40.
Heck, I mean, you used to be able to smoke on flights.
Oh, I know. I like in restaurants. Would you like the smoking or non-smoking section? Like, as if the smoke knows that it can't go into that area, right?
Yeah.
But at any rate, so 2016, 2018, something like that, there was a band that had, I think I knew 2 songs by the band, and I'd seen an interview with the band on, I don't know, MTV or something, somewhere. And I thought, well, this is kind of cool. This is a British band. I kind of like the sound of these 2 songs they have. Maybe I shouldn't even admit this. And they seem kind of cool. They were in the interview, they were wearing kind of like bell-bottomy jeans and black leather boots. And I thought, these guys are cool. And I like to, it's fun to get on board with something that's a little off the beaten path. So I said to myself, I think I'm going to start listening to some of these songs by this band. So I downloaded a couple of songs and I really liked them. And then at the old place that I worked, I come in one day and we're in our little meeting and they said, we have tickets to give away for this concert. And it happened to be this band. And I said, I'd like to go see that. That'd be great. So I got 2 tickets. It was at the Coliseum at the fairgrounds. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to Shannon, hey, I got tickets to this band. Do you want to go? And she's like, nah, I'm sorry, that's the day I get my manicure. I'm like, okay, fine. So I go by myself, okay?
Is it arduous process there?
I mean, it was not. It was a very quick decision on her behalf, and I wasn't sure why. I think this actually more was like 2013. So I go by myself, and I'm kind of excited about it, right? I go into the concert, and it's the Beatles played at the Coliseum, and that's kind of cool. And so here we are, and they're seeing shows there, and I looked around, and I thought, well, this is odd.
Derek Schultz?
I don't even know. Derek might have even been too cool for this, and that's saying something. I literally, and then it was very awkward because totally unbeknownst to me, I think it was, and they come out, and the first thing they said is, listen, just so everybody knows, we are not a boy band, okay? And then the drummer comes up and goes, that's right, we're not a flippin' boy band, but he didn't say flippin'. And the crowd is aghast because it is nothing now but 35-year-old women and their 12-year-old daughters and me. I'm the only person there that literally, not only was I the only one using the men's restroom, I was the only one over the age of 35. And I'm sure there probably were people I don't know what that guy's doing here. And I will say, I stayed for the whole show. It was actually a pretty enjoyable show.
Coldplay?
Not near that big. Coldplay's massive. This band played at the Coliseum. Nothing wrong with the Coliseum, right? I think there were people that thought it was going to be a big breakthrough band. And I think they're still around, but they never necessarily broke through to that level. You know what I mean?
I'm trying to figure out who that would have been. You said 2010s?
2012, 2013, something like that.
I'm not sure.
Now, One Direction, if you would have gone to that show, would there have been like people other than like just boy band crowds there?
Probably not.
The 1975. Are you familiar with them?
Not one bit. Never heard of them.
Not familiar with the 1975?
No.
Look up Chocolate, the song Chocolate. You might know that. By the way, on a side note, and we'll get into this more in just a couple of minutes, big time rumors flying around about Indiana basketball. And I'm going to maintain, several people have sent this to me in the last probably 20 minutes. There is wide speculation that Mike Woodson at the end of the year is out. I think is, it comes down to this. There are going to be all kinds of things that you're going to hear. And what did I mention yesterday? What I mentioned yesterday was in 2006. I think there are some parallels here. In 2006, Indiana was, I think they had lost 2 of 3 or 4 or 5. They weren't playing particularly well. And Mike Davis, who, again, I don't need to go over my thoughts on the job that Mike Davis did at Indiana, and I do think that they should have a statue of Mike Davis by Cook Hall. And I know that people think that's crazy because of the way it ended, but he was put in the most difficult position in the history of college basketball and took his team to the national championship game. And I thought, at the time, I thought that he cracked under the pressure of Indiana. And now that I know more about the things that he had to put up with, I think he defined actually the grace of the way that he handled situations at Indiana. And I think the world of the situation he was put in and the way he handled it. But when Indiana in 2006 in February was getting ready to play Iowa, and Steve Alford was coming in, and Alford was, of course, a legend at Indiana, et cetera, and everybody was expecting that eventually that it was a fait accompli that Steve Alford would take over the Indiana program. And so when Indiana was getting ready to play Iowa and the heat was at its most of Mike Davis and the scrutiny of the future of Mike Davis, and I was there at the NIT game when they hosted Vanderbilt, and there were like 5,500 people there. Probably more than that, but it was about half full. I mean, it was ugly at the end. And that was the game when Mike Davis, maybe he was ill, but on the day of the game, it was, hey, Mike Davis is ill and is not going to be able to coach tonight. And so he was not on the sidelines opposite of Steve Alford. I have said on this show, and we have speculated about what would happen when Mike Woodson, would, after chance of fire Woodson, would be ringing down from Assembly Hall, and then he would have to go out if they were to lose 2 games. And I thought they looked okay against Purdue, but they got blown off the floor at Wisconsin. Not a huge surprise, but they, knowing now that the next coach to come into Assembly Hall is Dusty May, who, like Alford, is a guy that many people think is maybe not the prime candidate, but one of a handful of candidates for that job, and knowing that he's going to be the next guy on the sideline, what is going to happen if Mike Woodson comes out, and how's the Assembly Hall crowd going to react? And there is a lot of speculation about whether or not that situation is going to present itself, and we will get much more in-depth on that in just a couple of minutes. And Zack Keefer joins us top of the 2 o'clock hour here on a Thursday, Aquarian Company. So do you know the song, Eddie, or not?
Doesn't ring any bells.
Really?
Mm-mm.
So that dude that right there, apparently he dated Taylor Swift for a while. So that's the Travis Kelce of boy bands right there.
Which album is about him?
Well, obviously not 1989, right? 14-year difference there. Isn't that the name of one of her albums?
You're probably right.
Now wait a minute. Now, hold on. Hang on. Hold the phone. Before we get to the Mike Woodson discussion, hang on. Do you have the breaking news sounder, by the way? This just in, graying 52-year-old lame guy knows more about Taylor Swift than Eddie Garrison.
Here's the thing. In today's streaming society, everything's streamed, whether that's Spotify or whatever, YouTube, whatever you use to stream music. You do it for individual songs now more so than albums, and plus there's no CDs.
Totally fair.
To memorize album names.
I completely agree with you, actually, yes. You're right. I mean, you're right about that, right? Where people are like when they say so-and-so has a new album out, and you're like, a new album out? Like
that song was out like 6 months ago.
Am I going to Camelot Music? Like, what do you mean, a new album out?
Do any of the new cars anymore have CD players in them?
I don't think so. My favorite, by the way, I loved Trax Record and Tapes up in there was a great one up in Castleton. Unfortunately, it was at a Shoney's that had a very ominous ending to their business. But Trax moved in, and Trax was awesome. And then I loved Peaches Record and Tapes, where that you could get a peach crate. I think I still have a peach crate from Peaches Record and Tapes. Okay, there are a lot of, now I will say, as of right now, maybe I'll be proven wrong. I do believe, and I've said this for a while now, I do believe that Mike Woodson's tenure as the head coach at Indiana, barring an incredible run here.
How far would they have to make it in the tournament in order to do that?
Elite Eight, minimum. They've got to make the tournament first. And I don't know that
I mean, will they make the Big Ten tournament at this rate?
I mean, the at this rate, they are looking at a Thursday date in the Big Ten tournament, Thursday or Friday, right? But that said, it is my belief, and I have said forever, Mike Woodson is in his final year as the basketball coach at Indiana. I am not reporting that. That is strictly my just gut on everything that I've heard. When Mike Woodson was hired at Indiana, I think and at the time it was a pretty savvy hire, because what we know is that when Archie Miller was fired, that Indiana went after Brad Stevens, and they offered him a, what was it, $50 million contract, something like that, and Brad Stevens declined it. And, do I think they talked to a couple of other people? Probably. But they ended up with I don't have to go over all of this. People know this by now. But Mike Woodson, what's that?
The Wonder Kid with Archie Miller.
And listen, when Archie Miller was hired, Fred Glass was my guy. They got rid of Tom Crean because he wanted Archie Miller, and he was going to go get him, and was convinced it was a home run hire. And everybody, myself included, thought it was the home run hire, and thought Archie Miller is going to be here for 25 years. And he just was. It is interesting. Like Archie Miller, his tenure as the basketball coach at Indiana, it feels like I don't even know, like the Gerald Ford presidency. Like it's like, or like Calvin Coolidge. It's like, okay, yeah, I guess, he was there. I don't remember a lot about it, although Ford, there was a pretty big thing there that happened. But at any rate, you get my point. When Woodson came in, Thad Matta was going to be there to help acclimate him to the college game. Dane Fife was on the staff, and I think there was wide speculation that, in fact, Dane Fife would eventually be a candidate to take over, if not Thad Matta. But I don't think anybody, if you go back and look at it, I don't think there's anybody that thought that Mike Woodson was the long-term guy, based primarily on his age. I mean, that is no knock on him, but his age, right? I mean, I think everybody thought, okay, this is perfect. You're appeasing two things here. You're going back to the roots of Bob Knight, Indiana basketball, and you have somebody that has NBA experience that can recruit and will be able to steady the ship, get things back on course, bring back some of the old fan base, get some enthusiasm, do it for 4 or 5 years, and put them in good position to then hand off to, whether it be Brad Stevens, whether it be now Dusty May's name in. I don't know that it was 5 years ago, but 4 years ago, but now, whether it be Chris Beard, who I think is starting to work his way up into that conversation. And there is a very big glaring thing on the resume there of the domestic abuse allegation and then, arrest and then that being dropped. But when you have Chris Beard mentioning Bob Knight, it almost is like Chris Beard knows that maybe the time to start auditioning is now. With all of that said, I think going into the year, we knew this was a huge year for Mike Woodson, and I have always felt because of, I don't think Mike Woodson's going to be, and I could be totally proven wrong here, but I don't think Mike Woodson is going to be terminated before the season is over with. First off, there's nothing to be gained by it, right? What is to be gained by doing it right now?
Nothing. Other than appeasing the fan base that he's gone. You can, in today's college athletics, you can go behind the coach's back and start negotiating with other coaches. Happens all the time.
But because he is this is just my point on it. Because he's a legacy at Indiana, because he is still, when it comes down to it, and the problem for Woodson as a player is that he played, ironically enough, Mike Woodson's playing era is kind of similar to Archie Miller's coaching era. Woodson was on a great team in 1980 and was a big part of that, but people think of the 80 team that won the Big Ten as much Woodson. I think and maybe even Carter, they think of Isaiah and the fact that Isaiah was a freshman and setting the table for the 81 team. So Woodson has, at no fault of his, the unfortunate timing of being a guy that bridged two national championship eras. He came in right after the 76 team and the undefeated team, and he left right before the 81 team. And he had a remarkable career. And until Isaiah Thomas, he was no question, the best NBA Bob Knight player in Indiana, still is. Other than Isaiah Thomas, he's the best player to have played in the NBA as an NBA player to have played for Bob Knight. I mean, Walt Bellamy would be the only player that rivals Isaiah Thomas in terms of NBA resume, but Walt Bellamy was not obviously a Knight player. McGinnis as well, but, not a Knight player. Having said all of that, Woodson, because of his connection to Indiana, because of his service to Indiana basketball, unless he goes down completely defiantly, he is going to be given, and I would anticipate that what is going to happen is that he is going to retire at the end of the season. I would be stunned if it's anything other than that. And whenever the season ends for him, I don't think that would be announced prematurely, but who knows? But I don't see, and is it going to be tricky on the sidelines with Dusty May? Yes. Is it going to be uncomfortable? Yes. Might actually be worth the price of admission just to see what the student body does. I hope they don't make it a huge scene, but it could be uncomfortable. Without a doubt.
If you're the fan base and if you want Dusty May, would it be worthwhile booing Mike Woodson if he's introduced? Would that send the wrong message to Dusty May? If he's hearing the boos of the opposing coach of a team that he may or may not want to coach? Would that deter you?
That's a great question. And I do think that, Eddie, I think you raise a fabulous question. And I think it's one that is worth exploring. And the thing that makes Indiana unique, the thing that makes Indiana special, the thing that makes Indiana what it is as a job, as a program. Strangely enough, I think we have, when we live in Indiana, we have rose-colored glasses about a lot of things. I'm as guilty of it as anybody. And sometimes it's difficult to gauge. You hear me a lot of times when we have people on, writers from other markets or national writers. Every once in a while you'll hear me ask this question where I will say, hey, just out of curiosity, when you think of the Colts, what franchise do you think of them as in the same breath as? Or I'll ask the same of the Pacers or whatever else. And I think that we, in the state of Indiana, still think of Indiana as Kansas, Duke, Kentucky, UCLA in terms of the desire for a coach to run that program, this program. And the reality is that we might have rose-colored glasses. And the reality also is that those rose-colored glasses might mean that it's difficult for us to find out that the actual indictment on why those colored glasses are rose is because of what we're seeing in the mirror. And it's difficult for us to understand and grasp what that means. And when I say it, it's difficult to understand and grasp it, which is why I will elaborate on exactly that in 5. Say this, but I had such, like, growing up, and I still do, a pride for Indiana, right? And the best way I can say this is this, and it's hard to say because I want to make very clear that people understand what I'm saying here, because I'm with you. I mean, I'm not casting this on the people of, like, Indiana basketball fans. I'm telling you, I'm giving you tough love here because I'm with you. I mean, I grew up the biggest Indiana fan, as big as anybody, right? And so I'm not condemning anybody here. But I do think, and I understand it, there's very little I can say that I've probably not said or that others have not said in a far more articulate fashion than myself about the status, the state of Indiana University basketball. But if you are within a certain age range, certainly I would be the dead set middle of this demographic. You know, I was born the year that Bob Knight began at Indiana. So for myself and my contemporaries, it was, and this was before, you know, the Pacers were an ABA great team, but they weren't in the NBA yet. The Colts were watching Burt Jones throw passes in Baltimore Memorial Stadium, right? The NFL here was selecting in 1982, 1981, whatever. I mean, I'm going way back. But if you lived in Indianapolis, Indiana, your exposure and your involvement with the National Football League came down to one of two things. Either watching the one of two games nationally televised that week or selecting whether or not you were going to get a Bengals or Bears pint glass with a fill-up at Shell. Okay? Or Hardee's. Back then, Burger Chef. And Indiana basketball was our identity because of the fact that they were when you would tell people you were from Indiana, the first thing they thought of, now if you said Indianapolis, they might have said the Indy 500 because it was at its heyday in that era as well. But if you said Indiana, people thought of Bob Knight and Indiana basketball. And so it became our identity, whether you were a graduate of Indiana University or an aspiring student there or just somebody that lived in Indiana. You knew that Indiana, when you went to Florida, you went to New York, whatever, you said, I'm from Indiana. They went, oh, Indiana, Bob Knight, Indiana basketball. And so now we tend to think that is the brand, if you will, that sticks with Indiana to this day. And that Indiana basketball still resonates outside the boundaries and borders of the state of Indiana. Purdue is the preeminent program in the state. That goes without saying. But I think that the living in the past and the longing for it, I understand why it is. There's a nostalgia amongst all of us, and we want nothing more than to be able to live in, you know, the spirit of and the feeling of when life was simpler for us and when the weather broke and you couldn't wait to watch Selection Sunday to see whether Indiana was a 1 seed or a 2 seed and, you know, all of those things. But I think that it's hard for people to recognize, realize, grasp, understand that because that is exactly who, like, we are in longing for that we forget outside of Indiana how long ago and distant ago that seems. And so the overzealous nature by which the fan base is pining for that and the pressure it creates and the expectation it creates and to an extent the delusion it creates, I think actually may turn people off, Eddie, to your point about that job.
Mm-hmm.
If you're Brad Stevens, you look at it and you go, well, I'm making really good money in Boston. I know that I grew up an Indiana fan and wanting to play for Bob Knight or coach at Indiana, but those are bygones, and the game is totally different now. And anything shy of going to routine Final Fours and a national championship, people are going to be pining for me to be run out of town. If you're Dusty May, you think, I was a manager at Indiana during the last great heyday of the Knight era, and I, you know, was around and saw the passion and grew up amidst the passion for Indiana basketball. But if I go there now, people are going to expect, because I took obviously a lesser-known school in Florida to the Final Four, people are going to automatically assume that I'm going to get Final Fours in Bloomington, because if I can do it there, I can do it anywhere. And anything shy of that, there's going to be the pitchforks come out. And as it is, I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where if I go to a Sweet 16 every 2 years, people are like, that's awesome. When spring practice start, right? John Beilein was as good a coach as anybody in college basketball at Michigan. And when he left to go to the NBA, people were like, oh, that's surprising. Man, that's weird. By the way, can we get Harbaugh?
Yeah.
If you are Chris Beard, that may be a job that for you is a destination job because you have such a reverence for Bob Knight. That's one of them that works in, but again, you have that scar there. But if you look at, and this is true everywhere, I'm not saying that this is unique to Indiana, but if you look at, for example, the post that Miles Rice put out showing people the DM that he got from Indiana fans about, telling him to kill himself, that probably does happen at other schools, but it's more illuminated in Indiana because it shows the passion for Indiana basketball. And for a long time, we loved the passion of Indiana basketball because it's what made the fan base, made the program different and unique, that we were all in on Indiana. And the same thing that Indiana fans roll their eyes about with Ohio State football, you need to look in the mirror and realize that that's exactly how you look as a fan of Indiana basketball. I was stunned when I left Indianapolis and went to other market and worked in other places to find out that they did not consider Indiana in the same breath as Kentucky and Kansas. And I'm like, no, guys. Highest winning percentage in the NCAA tournament, 5 national championships, last undefeated season. And this was 25 years ago. And people are like, yeah, dude, but what about now? What about right now? What's Indiana now? North Carolina might be going through it right now, right? With like Hubert Davis, right?
Oh, yeah, they've been god-awful this year. And now that all of Roy Williams' guys are pretty much gone, it's been all of the recruiting of Hubert Davis, and it has not gone well. They went to they make it to the championship or the Final Four? One of those two in his first year there with all the guys that Roy Williams left over. And then you had guys transfer, you had Caleb Love transfer, and it just hasn't worked out.
Right. And so because of all of that, I think Indiana has to handle this partially with Mike Woodson very tactfully. And what I mean by that is if you are any of those names that I just mentioned, Ben McCollum at Drake, somebody, Bruce Pearl at Auburn, who I think will be in discussion. If you are any of those guys and you look at it and you would say, I understand why Indiana parted ways with Mike Woodson. I understand why Indiana felt like because the program, if you look at where things were, it seemed discombobulated. I understand why Indiana moved on. But if they do it right now, then you look at it and you say, no, wait a minute. I'm Chris Beard. Yeah, I beat Purdue in the NCAA tournament, and yes, I was an assistant for Bob Knight at Texas Tech, and I say his name a lot in credit for my coaching style. But I don't have connection to Indiana. If I'm Brad Stevens, and you go, yeah, I'm a coaching savant, and I grew up in Indiana, but I went to DePaul, and I coached at Butler, and I went to the Celtics, I don't have a direct connection to Indiana University basketball other than being a fan of it.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm Ben McCollum, I go, I was in Drake. It's in the MoVal. So I've been to the state of Indiana, but I coached and cut my teeth in Virginia. And now here's Indiana. And if I'm Bruce Pearl, yeah, I coached in the Big Ten.
He coached
and I
in
coached
Indiana
at
as well.
Southern Indiana.
Yeah.
But I don't have a direct connection to Indiana. If I'm any of those guys, I look at it, and the first thing that I do is I look to see how the administration handled one of its most beloved alums.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at it and I say, okay, here's a guy that coached in the NBA, played in the NBA, was a beloved figure of Indiana basketball. And again, even though he was in kind of like this gray area time period of which he was a player, even with that, still, I look at Mike Woodson in terms of his status within the lore of Indiana basketball the day that he was hired. I don't mean now, because it probably has been, his legacy probably has been changed. Not has been, it has been changed in terms of how Indiana fans see him. But if I look at any of that, I think to myself, yeah, I'm hesitant now because look how quickly they chewed up and spit out their – and I'm not saying Woodson that it's not merited. Don't get me wrong. I think we've seen enough now to know that the time has come for it to be appropriate for Indiana to make a coaching change. But they have to do it strategically because of optics and because of optics in the presentation of what you are laying for whoever it is that comes in to replace him. But I think that's going to be down the road. I don't think it is right now. Zack Keefer joins us next. In Indianapolis, for that matter, the 2 o'clock hour is underway everywhere in the Eastern time zone. My name is Jake Query, Eddie Garrison, the other voice you hear on this program. It is called Query and Company here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Amongst the company are those that make recurring visits to this show. That includes our next guest who joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. He needs no introduction within the Indianapolis market, although his work now is of a national level. Zack Keefer from The Athletic joins us. And, Zach, you are down in the Big Easy in New Orleans, correct?
Yes, sir.
I guess the first question before we get to, some of the different topics, football and Super Bowl related, that I wanted to discuss, and this is kind of an odd question, I realize. Look, I've covered a handful of Super Bowls. It is unlike anything else. But when you combine, and I don't mean to bring up a tragic situation, but when you look at, for example, on the eve of the college football game, the Sugar Bowl, and what took place down there, and then just the obvious security that goes in with the Super Bowl itself, what's the atmosphere like? Security-wise, is it pretty much the same you see at every Super Bowl? Does it feel more intense? Just what's the overall mood?
No, it is not the same. And I've done 4 or 5 or 6 of these now. There is a noticeable difference this year. There is FBI SWAT on every corner, and they are definitely surrounding the team hotels that the players are staying at. And, I know that the general public does not care at all about this, but this is an amazing Super Bowl city. It is so easy to get around. You can walk everywhere. And every media person I have talked to has echoed the thought that I've always had, that Indy was such a great city to host, and it crushed it. And 60-degree weather we had that week in 2012 did not hurt. It's been 70 every day here, which is amazing. But the walkability, the ease to get around is unbelievable. I understand why so many people love having the Super Bowl here in New Orleans. It does feel a little bit like the one we had in Indy, where you could just get anywhere you needed to go in 5 minutes. But to sort of pivot to what you asked about, absolutely, there is more police presence, more security. It feels like they ratcheted that up in a very noticeable way.
Zach, I thought you had a really good piece recently on Mike Vanderjagt, and just, how somebody can go from being a player that is in the limelight and a focal point of a franchise to then living in relative anonymity, as Vanderjagt does. We had him on the show, and then you did a nice piece on him. Obviously, the guy that Vanderjagt handed the torch over to, maybe not willingly, was Adam Vinatieri, who is up for the Hall of Fame. So, too, is Reggie Wayne. So 2 of them, there are 15 finalists. If I'm not mistaken, 5 get in, right, off that finalist list of 15?
Correct.
I'll ask you the same question I've asked others. In your opinion, this Hall of Fame class in 2025 will feature 0, 1, or 2 members of the Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah, this is hard. I'm going to have to say 1. To answer your question a little bit, when I talked to Mike Vanderjagt, he spoke very highly of Adam Vinatieri. There was a serious level of respect there. And Vanderjagt, as I wrote and as you talked about on your show first, was, he lost it. He had lost that confidence, and he was not going to be a good kicker anymore. To pivot to the Hall of Fame discussion, I really believe Adam Vinatieri is in. He made his name. He made his legend on weekends like this, actually in this city, in the Superdome in 2002 with that first game winner for the New England Patriots. He's the Colts and the NFL's all-time leading scorer. He's a baller. When you do it at that stage, that stays with people on a national level. I think Vinny's in. I don't think that's much of a debate. I think he's the best ever at his position. And I hate this for Reggie, but I just think the log jam at receiver, and there is probably a national fatigue of Colts players making it in. And he played with Peyton Manning, he played with Marvin Harris and all that. I don't subscribe to that theory at all. But I do think the answer is 1. I think Vinny makes it, and unfortunately, I do not think Reggie makes it.
Yeah, it's interesting because Zack Keefer is our guest from The Athletic. When you look at, Steve Smith and Torrey Holt both, Steve Smith's a baller. I mean, no doubt about that, right? Torrey Holt, and it's interesting, I covered Torrey Holt and I covered Reggie Wayne because I was in St. Louis and covered the Rams. And the things that you would kind of hold against Reggie Wayne, if you will, could also be said for Torrey Holt. He had Isaac Bruce on the other side. He had Marshall Faulk in the backfield. He had Kurt Warner throwing to him. But yet I get the feeling that Holt is seen in a slightly higher light than is Reggie Wayne nationally speaking. Do you agree with that?
I do, and Jake, I don't get it. And I try not to be biased, right? But forget that, man. Take the reporter hat off. Reggie Wayne was a baller, too. I mean, he played his best football in the playoffs when we want them to play their best, and we destroy them and criticize them when they do not. He was an embodiment of everything you want in a professional football player. He played something like 210 games, 200 in a row for the Colts. Look up the Iron Men. Look up real Iron Men for the Colts. He played more consecutive games than Peyton. He played more games than Vinny. And I know Vinny played a lot of years before that in New England, but he's the embodiment of a professional football player. The Colt for life. And I just think that, and this isn't some great logic. There's no, there's a ton of data, but just give me the eye test. And Reggie Wayne was a Hall of Famer. And he was a number one playing with a number one. He absolutely was a tremendous player, never complained about being number two to Marvin. And then when they lost Marvin to injury in 2007 and then to retirement after that, what happened? That dude stepped up and carried the offense. And then what happened when Peyton left and Andrew Luck took over in 2012? You could make the case that Reggie was an MVP candidate the first 5-6 weeks of that season in 2012. He was that good. The Orange Glove game against the Packers when Chuck was in the hospital. So, I'm biased. I grew up in Indy. I watched those teams. Reggie Wayne was a Hall of Famer because my eyes told me he was a Hall of Famer.
Well, to me, what separates him as well, and I can't say – I didn't cover Holt at the end of his career, right, nor Steve Smith. But to me, what makes Reggie Wayne a Hall of Famer, Zach, is that he was able to – I'm not going to say reinvent, but he was able to use your word, pivot, of the style of play once his body no longer allowed him to be a behind the defense long ball receiver. He was able to extend his career by being not just a safety net possession receiver, for lack of a better phrase, but a darn good one, right? And one that was for and not to mention the tutelage of Andrew Luck in what was probably the best rookie season in history for a quarterback. Such a big part of that was Reggie Wayne, and yet he was a different receiver than he was when he first came into the league. To me, the ability, the versatility of resume is what gets him in.
Absolutely, and this is something you mentioned that's not talked about enough. He almost left in 2012, right? He had more money on the table a couple of places. I think it was Kansas City, New England called as well, and the Colts were going through that huge reset. They just cut a bunch of his teammates. They cut his quarterback. And they were starting over with this kid from Stanford who was supposed to be really good, and then a bunch of nothing, right? They were drained at the roster positions, and Reggie locked himself in his office and wouldn't let anybody in as he decided. And Chuck Pagano texted him and said, "I need you, Reggie," and he chose to come back, and he was exceptional. Andrew Luck will tell you for days how much Reggie meant that first year. T.Y. Hilton will tell you for days how much it meant that Reggie took him under his wing. And I know we come from the small town of Indianapolis, and it's not the national NFL landscape that some cities are, but that mattered. That transition is absurd when you think about it. They were 2-14. They gutted the roster. They had a rookie coach, rookie GM, rookie quarterback. They won 11 games with Andrew Luck and Reggie Wayne, and 8 of them at the buzzer. The offensive line was trash. No offense to those guys. The defense was made up of a bunch of guys. I can't even remember the names. And Reggie was such a benchmark of that season. And Luck was tremendous. But Luck will tell you the reason is because Reggie Wayne came back and stayed. And that should never be forgotten in the annals of Colts history.
Zach, when you look, Zack Keefer is our guest from The Athletic. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. I had mentioned this earlier, and I want to make sure that I'm not being too critical. Okay, I'm gonna trust you here to tell me if you think I'm off base and I'm being too critical. When I look at Kansas City and I look at Philadelphia and I look at the style of play, the open space speed, the defensive especially, just the tactical way that they're able to defend, but offensively just having weapons all over and spreading it out, it feels to me like the Colts are not only far off from that, but also completely off in terms of the way that they're designed. And the Colts feel like an F-150, and we're getting ready to watch a Lamborghini and a Ferrari. And I just don't know how you switch from one to the next. Can it be done in today's NFL where you can And do they need to flip their style that much?
You can't do it in one off season. This is a reflection of how these teams have been built. And it's funny, I was talking to a lot of people last night, around the league, writers and stuff, just how consistent these teams have been and how the other side of it, and I don't mean specifically the Colts, but a lot of teams just don't get it. I mean, you need to be uber aggressive to get to this weekend, right? It's not just the Chiefs trading up to get Mahomes. It's, they rebuilt their offensive line in one off season after they lost that Tampa Bay Super Bowl. They continually make swings at receiver to add potential for Patrick Mahomes. Flip the side, the Eagles. I mean, Carson Wentz has one bad season and they move off him 2-3 years after he was an MVP candidate. The Colts keep consistently keeping this thought in the head that they're close. They're close if they just stay patient. Where's that gotten them, right? All they've done is regress. They are far away from these teams. And if you look at the rosters, it speaks to that. I mean, Kansas City can beat you every which way. They can beat you with offense. They can beat you with a defense that Spagnuolo and Brett Veach have built up the last couple of years. It is remarkable how well they have done that from a personnel standpoint. And Kansas City's done the same thing. I mean, 8 of 11 starters on defense are different when they played in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. 2 years ago. And there's one play that comes to mind when I go back to the Colts and kind of what you asked about the conservative nature. Game 1, they're playing the Texans. They got to win this one, right? We all know they haven't won an opener in, 9 or 10 years. I've lost track. And it's a third down, and they need to get a stop. And what do? They give Nico Collins all the space in the world, and he gets the third down, and they win the game. And it's just like that's just a snapshot into where the Colts are. Like, win the game. Win week 1 for the first time in a decade. Beat the Texans finally, and change the way that people see you and the way that you see yourself. But they haven't done that yet. So it's hard to do that in one off season. But if you want some lessons on how to build a team, look at these teams that are playing Sunday because they are it's just been masterful from Brett Veach and from Howie Roseman.
Zach, when you first were, doing the national beat for The Athletic and you were, as a result of that, you're covering all teams. I've asked you this before, but I don't think I've asked this nuanced the question. Chris Ballard, when he came to Indianapolis, was the boy wonder, right? I mean, this was a home run. This was Jim Irsay's like, this guy's, I don't remember, the Michael Jordan of GMs.
In Jim Irsay's words, maybe.
What's that?
In Jim Irsay's words, he was the most qualified GM candidate in the 21st century.
Okay. Now, with that, and it didn't seem like there was a lot of pushback on that. I mean, people were like, yeah, he's well-respected, he's well-liked. What do you feel is the perception of the job that he's done and his standing as a general manager amongst the league and his peers today?
Well, he was well-respected and he was well-liked, and Chris still is in some regards, but the perception is 180 in terms of team building. Like, this is a win-or-loss league. I mean, the results are the results, and there's no division titles. There's one playoff appearance since Andrew Luck walked out the door, and there is context and nuance to that. I've written about it. You've talked about it for years. That is real. But the reality is they just continue to fail. And one thing I will say, Jake, about bouncing around to the league, I've been to all these different locker rooms the last couple of years, and you can get a sense, like Chris is right when he says that the locker room doesn't lie. The locker room is a very real, raw place. So when I go to Detroit and I talk to half the team in December, and they're gutted by injuries, and they're still winning, I can tell why they're winning. Like, I've been around. I know enough. You know enough, Jake, when you talk to players to know when it's BS and when it's not. And I could tell why the Lions are winning. Like, they really believe in what Dan Campbell is doing. They really do. And I can tell when I'm around Kansas City, and I've been around them a lot the last couple of years. And same with Philadelphia. It's not just the talent. Some programs are just run better, and it starts with the coaching staff, and it starts with the personnel staff as well. But James Boyd and I's story at the end of the season spoke to the exact opposite. We had a player anonymously tell us, there's no vision here. There's no vision here. It starts at the top. It starts with the executives. It starts with the coaches, and it goes down to the players. There's no vision here. And he said, we're tired of it. And Kenny Moore said this on the record in the middle of the season. And so, the locker room doesn't lie. When players are saying that, that's a very telling snapshot into what is wrong. And this league is hard enough, but the reality is every team has good players. But some of the teams figure it out. And the teams that are playing Sunday, they absolutely have figured it out. And I just didn't get that vibe at all from the Colts. And as Chris said at the end of the season press conference, It starts with him. He was 100% wrong in his approach last year to essentially run it back with the same roster. And you can't just change that in one off season. Not if you keep everybody in place.
Zach, you know how, and you tell me if I'm wrong here. There are probably plenty of examples to say why I'm wrong. But you know how I can tell when a sports franchise has great culture? The way I can tell that a sports franchise has great culture is they never mention it. They don't have to tell me about it. They don't have to market it. They don't have to campaign it. They just do it.
Love it. You're right. They don't have to tweet about it.
Right. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Do the Lions have some marketing campaign about their culture? Or do we just know it because you see guys that are ready to run through a wall for their coach who, most importantly, when things don't go well, stands up there and says, you know what, that's on me. It's on me.
Yep.
I made the wrong call.
It's not when you're – and I don't mean to pick on Anthony Richardson, but when your star quarterback taps out of a game and then is subsequently benched, the head coach stands at the podium and muddies the message in a way that makes the situation exponentially worse, right? Or later in the season when he's about to play the Giants in a game they have to win and the quarterback doesn't practice all week and the coach kind of fibs up there, right, and says, oh, he's just tired, he's just sore. Oh, no, he couldn't even raise his arm or whatever the situation was. Like, they had just made this exponentially worse. And as James Boyd, my colleague, says a lot, those are unserious things. Those are what unserious teams do. And you're right, Jake, that is such a good point. Like, they don't have to – like, the Chiefs don't have to market. They just win. The Lions, they win in the regular season, 15 games with a battered defense. The Eagles, 2 Super Bowls in 3 years, they just win. That is the great marketer in this league.
And, Zach, here's the thing. When Shane Steichen came to the Colts, what did we hear? This guy's all ball, man. Like, you good luck trying to get him to talk about anything but football. He's locked in. He's got tunnel vision. And I like him. I mean, we were at Colts training camp and talked to him for a while after we had him on. He's a good dude. I mean, I don't dislike Shane Steichen at all. But, and I don't mean this because of what we do for a living, and I hope the audience doesn't think that I'm being too esoteric or nuanced when I say this, but would it behoove Shane Steichen to actually undergo like some media training because of the fact that he seemed to send mixed messages and muddy the waters too often this year and push the wrong PR buttons more often than the right ones?
Absolutely. I mean, look, like, the greatest message is just winning, right? But you can be all ball, right? Who's all ball? Like, what famous coach is all ball and terrible at the podium? Bill Belichick,
yeah,
right?
For sure.
But all I did was win. He never won the press conference. I don't care about winning the press conference. I care about winning the game. But it matters. It matters when you're up there. And he does not have the brevity. He does not have the presence. He does not have the record, the reputation that Belichick does, right? Nobody does, right? But the reality is Andy Reid can get up there, and I've listened to him 6 times this week, and he said nothing. He said nothing interesting. But the reality is it matters. The presence matters, the message matters, and the players pay attention to that stuff. They really do. And the Colts messed it up in 2 big ways this year by, Anthony Richardson admitting he was tired and Shane Steichen's aforementioned issues, explaining the truth, explaining the benching, explaining why he wasn't going to play against the Giants. It just speaks to a team that's not really figured these little things out. And when you don't figure those little things out and then you go get rolled in New York and give up, I don't know, like 38 points to a Giants team that hadn't scored 20 in the, since September, like, it's just like, what are you doing right? Like, that's what unserious teams do. And until the Colts change that, that's the reputation that they have earned for themselves.
Okay, Zach, before we let you go, Zack Keefer, before I let you go get your Yats down in New Orleans, I'm going to mention to you the 15 Hall of Fame finalists, and I want you to tell me, when I mention their name, if you think they're in this year. You ready?
This is going to be tough. Let's do it.
Okay, Eric Allen. Here, I'll give you these answers, Zach. You can say, yes, he's in this year, or yes, I think eventually he gets in, but this is not the year it happens, okay? Cornerback Eric Allen.
Eventually.
Okay. Defensive end Jared Allen.
This year.
Offensive tackle Willie Anderson.
Eventually.
Offensive guard Jari Evans.
Eventually.
Tight end Antonio Gates.
This year.
Wide receiver Torrey Holt.
Eventually.
Guy whose last name trips me up every single time. It's been a mental hurdle since the time that he was dominating for Carolina right out of the womb. Luke Kuechly, linebacker.
I'm going to go with this year.
Okay. Quarterback Eli Manning.
This year.
Wide receiver Steve Smith.
This year.
Terrell Suggs.
Not this year.
Running back Fred Taylor.
Not this year.
Darren Woodson, safety.
Not this year.
Marshall Yanda, offensive guard.
Great player. Not this year.
Now, here's the thing. You're at 5 right now, and only 5 get in, right?
I thought I was at 4. I was saving the last one for Vinny.
Vinatieri and Reggie Wayne, the last 2. So that means you got to knock off one of those that you had in. And I believe who you had in, gosh, I can't remember now. I should have written it down, right?
Jared Allen, Steve Smith were 2 that I remember.
Antonio Gates, you had him in. Eli Manning, you had him in. And Steve Smith, you had in.
This is really hard. I sat down with Eli this morning, and they can't talk about it. He knows if he's in or not. I heard it was a very long discussion in the Hall of Fame voters room. Let's knock off Steve Smith because I think Vinatieri's career stacks up a little bit better, even though it's a ridiculous comparison because there's 2 different positions. But I just think Vinny's in. I think you hear the name Vinatieri and you just think Gold Jacket.
Is Eli Manning's discussion as lengthy as it is, even with his postseason prowess, but in comparison to his regular seasons and et cetera, if he is not still a major relevant cultural part of the NFL and if his name is Eli Keefer?
Yeah, I don't think it stacks up. Just like gun to my head, I don't think it's a Hall of Fame career. Great runs in the postseason. I don't think it's a Hall of Fame career. I think at the end of the day, Jake, fans know. Like, you know when you're watching a Hall of Famer, and I do not think Eli Manning met that criteria. That's just my opinion.
I don't disagree, but he became very likable even after his career just because of the Manning cast.
Great.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
So I'll tell you this real quick before I go, Jake. I sat down with him, on the stage today for this interview with The Athletic, and I'd never talked to Eli before, but I know his brother really well from Indy, as you do. And I said, I did that story about the Manning cast. I hung with Peyton all night. I've known Peyton really well, and blah, blah, blah. And Eli's like, oh, cool. And he just goes on to the next topic. Like, he is the polar opposite of his brother. It was just hilarious how little he cared about that.
I don't know Eli really at all, other than the fact that I was, covering the Super Bowl when he was here, right? And was down there it was such a bizarre time because of the Peyton Manning uncertainty at that time. But
Correct.
Just being down there with us, seeing him and his dad and his mom, all of it, right? And now, did you get a chance, by the way, did you go, I can't remember if it was you or someone I was talking to, you admit, I think it was you, was it not, that you were thinking about trying to go down to the Garden District and see where they grew up?
Yes, sir. That's the plan. When I get a day off, I'll let you know. That's the aim for maybe Saturday. But the stories are not stopping. I got one about Nick Sirianni coming out tomorrow, and it starts with a scene from his days with the Colts. So it's a very fascinating character to dig into.
All right. We look forward to reading it at The Athletic. Zach, appreciate the time. As always, be safe down there, all right?
All right. Thanks, Jake.
All right, Zack Keefer from New Orleans. Been down there for several times in New Orleans, obviously, for IndyCar race. I've been down there for the Final Fours. It is a great city for that, for sure.
It's not Nolans.
Down there,
Orleans.
If you say New Orleans or New Orleans, they're like, what? Down there, they definitely would say either New Orleans or Narlands, for sure. And, of course, my favorite Final Four that took place there. 82, they had the Final Four there. 87 Final Four warms my heart. 93 Final Four, the Chris Webber timeout. That one jumps to mind. There's been a ton that's down there. Kentucky, closing it out with Anthony Davis, was the Final Four was there. That was the year, I think that was the year where I've never seen a bigger rainstorm than I saw during the Final Four down in New Orleans that year. Massive, massive rainstorm. Trade deadline, by the way, everybody in the league is on the clock.
Tick, 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 tick.
Because there are now 34 minutes remaining in the NBA trade deadline. 35 if you ask David Morway, apparently. But we'll get you caught up on what's been going on around the association next. caught up first off on the latest rumor mill in Bloomington. By the way, would you like a Jake Query confession, Eddie?
You love this song or you love Cher?
I think Cher's smoking hot. I've always thought Cher's hot.
Before you get into your Mike Woodson thing here in a second.
You're just going to fly over that?
Yeah.
I know she's like 70 now, but I've always found Cher to be hot.
So you know how you say it's 2 o'clock everywhere in the Eastern time zone?
Mm-hmm.
It's 2:28 a.m. in Bangkok.
Okay.
Wouldn't it also be 2 o'clock?
Well, that's true, but when I say it's 2 o'clock in Indianapolis, for that matter, it's 2 o'clock everywhere in the Eastern time zone, that still is factual, even if it's 2 o'clock elsewhere on the planet.
But if you're just saying 2 o'clock, it's like not 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Well, but what I'm saying is this, okay? Let's say, for example, that you, Kevin Bowen, and James V are all wearing gray sweatshirts today.
Okay.
If I said, and let's say that 3 people that are working down on Monument Circle in a different building are wearing gray sweatshirts.
Do they have their hard hats?
What's that?
Do they have their hard hats?
Correct. They're out there working on the steps for the 19th straight year. If I said Eddie Garrison's wearing his gray sweatshirt, for that matter, everyone inside this building's wearing a gray sweatshirt. If I have one on as well, then that is a factual statement. That is not to say that there aren't people elsewhere that are wearing a gray sweatshirt. So it is factually correct to say it's 2 o'clock in Indianapolis. For that matter, it's 2 o'clock everywhere in the Eastern time zone. I'm not limiting it to the Eastern time zone. There could be, you are correct, now what time zone is Bangkok in? Do we know?
No, I don't know what the technical time zone of this is. Look it up.
Is it just I believe they just call that the Thai zone, right? Is that what it is? Okay.
ICT. I can't say the I, so that's why I abbreviated.
Oh,
that
that's
is the time zone.
The ICT zone. Yeah, that's right. Probably
Indochina?
I was going to say Indonesian coastal zone Indochina zone. So there is a lot of smoke in Bloomington around, and I don't mean that because of cigars, around Mike Woodson and his future. Again, I'm going to go back to what, I think that the one thing that I have kind of gathered in talking to people down there is that I think Woodson has a lot of pride, and that pride maybe bleeds itself or lends itself into not always reading the room in totality. And I think it seems to be inevitable, and as I've said for a long time, that he will not be coaching Indiana next year. But in terms of how they navigate through that change is, I think, right now probably what is all being discussed. And there's a lot going on for certain. There's a lot going on down there. And if, in fact, Mike Woodson agreed to a retirement at the end of the year and then came back and said, you know what, no, I'm not down for that. That's rumored to be out there. I think all things are on the table, but I think it's safe to say that he's not going to be coaching Indiana next year. Now, whether he is this weekend against Michigan, we'll see, because that's going to be – it's just going to be – it actually might be the best ticket of the year. It's going to be unbelievable theater down there for certain, absolutely for certain. Now, the NBA trade deadline is coming up. As a matter of fact, by the time we hand it over to John, who is going to be at Tom's Watch Bar, which you have time. They open at 4 o'clock. He's going to be there from 3 until 6, but Tom's opens up at 4 o'clock. You got plenty of time to go down there and enjoy a cold beer. Diet Coke, perfectly sufficient. They've got fabulous food, by the way. The nachos there are top shelf to be listening to John. But by the time he's on, the trade deadline will have passed. Eddie, would you like to update us, if you could, on some of the latest happenings that we may not be aware of the NBA trade deadline and whether or not Indiana is rumored to be a part of any of it?
I can certainly do so, Jake. The latest trade coming about 10 minutes ago as we concluded the segment with Zack Keefer, the LA Clippers. So that's important for tonight's game for the Pacers because they are trading Terrence Mann and Bones Highland to the Atlanta Hawks for Bogdanovich.
Okay, now that's not the Bojan Bogdanovic
picks.
that played here, right?
Correct.
There are 2 of them.
Correct. This is Bogdan. That's Bojan. The Atlanta Hawks are in another trade. This is a little less than an hour ago with the Cleveland Cavaliers that sent DeAndre Hunter to Cleveland for Karis LeVert, Georges Niang, and 3 second-round picks.
You know what that means, don't you?
And 2 pick swaps.
That means that the Atlanta Hawks, in trading DeAndre Hunter to Cleveland, are acquiring 2 players that have what in common between Karis LeVert and Georges Niang?
Played here.
I believe it's just George, though, right? Georges Niang. Both played here, correct. Niang, actually, man, give that guy credit. He looks like a volunteer high school offensive line football coach. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But he can shoot, and he's been around forever, man. That guy's carved out a nice career for himself.
And then the final trade about an hour ago, the Phoenix Suns sent Yusuf Nurkic in a 2026 first-round pick to Charlotte for Cody Martin. I don't know how to say Micic's first name, but V. Micic, and a 2026 second-round pick.
My understanding also, that was a trade that they had to throw in some cap space so that both players could buy a vowel, right?
That's right. That's right.
Now, notable, some of the names that have been floated around that many, many people thought would be, calling up real estate agents. Kevin Durant looks like is going to stay in Phoenix, right?
That is a bloody and a dangerous situation over there now because they couldn't find a trade partner for Bradley Beal, so they pivoted to see if they could trade Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant steps in and blocks a trade that would have sent him to the Warriors.
That's his first block in a long time, by the way.
And now you've got a very upset Kevin Durant over the fact that they were trying to trade him without consulting with him.
And there was some discussion that Atlanta wanted to get involved with Durant too, but that hasn't taken place. Also,
a couple other names I remember. Cam Johnson of Brooklyn Nets. That's been a hot name.
Boy, for a long time. He was like the first
season.
one that was rumored to be going somewhere, right?
Yeah. And then in Milwaukee, they've already traded Chris Middleton, which I don't understand them trading Chris Middleton for Kyle Kuzma by any standard unless they think that low of Middleton and being able to stay
Middleton's
healthy.
Been banged up with those ankles, right?
Yes. Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton are two names to monitor in Milwaukee, as well as it appears they're entering the shed salary cap portion of the Giannis and Lillard era, which could get very dicey next offseason.
Okay, I'll tell you a player. There's not a lot of areas where I speak things into existence, right?
Sometimes, yes. I'll never forget the IU going into the big house and pulling off that upset.
No. I was just talking about the first quarter.
Or Purdue shocking the world and beating Oregon.
Yeah, I got to meet the Duck. So that was all that mattered there, right?
Yeah.
But, and I've got it, I know what it was, and I wish the audio existed of this somewhere. I remember one day just kind of spontaneously, about 2 weeks before the NBA draft, and I was doing the show with Derek, and I said, you know what? I said, I'll be honest with you. I think I would take this kid, John Morant, number one before Zion Williamson. And Derek was like, what? And I said, for whatever reason, I think Williamson's a wonderful player, and he's unbelievable, excitement. But when I look at his body type and what he does that stands out at the college level, I don't know if the latter, I mean, obviously it translates to the NBA, but that it comes at the ease that it does in college, but more so his body type worried me because I'm like, he looks like a guy that has, I remember when Mark McGuire, for example, had his patellar tendonitis issues. And so, when I was covering the Cardinals, that was a major talking point.
Is that when he decided to start taking the roids?
This would have been well after that, which I think. And so here's the thing. So in talking to a doctor about that, he said the problem with adding huge muscle mass to a body is your tendons on your knees are designed and built for what your ideal body weight's going to be. So when you start putting on muscle artificially, your body's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like the rest of us is not built. We don't have the bridge support here, right, for this. And in Zion Williamson's case, even though he is obviously a physical specimen, he seemed to be so likely to put on weight so easily that I felt like it just was going to be a challenge for him to stay healthy. And that's kind of been the case, right? I mean, honestly, and I don't even know, Eddie, you tell me, doesn't it feel like Zion Williamson hasn't played a game in like 2 years?
It feels like he plays a game or he'll play like 10 or 15, then
Correct.
He's out for
and
10
he's
or
good.
15.
Don't get me wrong, right? He's good.
Yeah. He's healthy right now. He's played in 23 games this year, averaging 23, 8, and 5.
I mean, those are like severe numbers, right? Like those are good numbers.
Like for his career, he's averaging almost 25 a game. But, I mean, he played 24 games his rookie year, 61, 29, 70 last year. So it just seems like there's a trend of I'm barely going to play 1 year. The next year I'll play 60, 70 games. The next year I'll play 15 to 20.
The other guy that was always, you thought was going to be like when the trade was made, like, wow, that's a big deal. That's just kind of lost in the anonymity that is the New Orleans Pelicans is C.J. McCollum, who's been a good player, right?
I wish they would just blow it up down in New Orleans because Herb Jones would be like the perfect fit with what the Pacers want to do. He's a really good defender. He can guard multiple positions. He can stand in a corner, knock down a three, and his contract is really nice.
I mean, that's a
Trey
franchise.
Murphy is also very good.
But here's the thing. I mean, they've got those players, and they're arguably the worst team in the league. One of the three worst, probably, right?
They have been ridiculed with injury this entire season. McCollum's been hurt. Murphy's been started the season hurt. Obviously, they just lost. He tore his Achilles the other night. Can't remember his name now.
For New Orleans?
Yes.
Hold on.
DeJounte Murray. DeJounte Murray just tore his Achilles.
He's really good, by the way.
Yep.
He was really good in Atlanta, right? And then I can't remember, did they trade for him or sign him as a free agent? But either way, there was a trade that happened yesterday, actually late last night, that affects the Indiana Pacers. The Indiana Pacers last night, during the trade deadline, during a period that feels like it's been quiet, something happened where you said to yourself, aha, there it is. That has implications for the Pacers. And it's a guy that, quite frankly, I thought was the perfect Pacer. But it turns out he might be a perfect player elsewhere, and it has Indiana implications. And the riddle all comes together in just a couple minutes, and we'll hand it up to John at Tom's Watch Party in 20. Saturday night. Anybody else going?
What's Saturday night?
Billy Joel and Sting at Lucas Oil Stadium.
Oh, really?
I was not going to go. We gave away. Remember, we gave away tickets. Trivia question about this song. As a matter of fact, the fact that the song was originally inspired by Elle Macpherson, and then by the time the video rolled around, Christy Brinkley was who was in the video, and so it kind of shifted to then, in a colloquial sense, it became known as being about Christy Brinkley. But
we got another trade, Jake.
Tickets have become manageable for that, by the way. Give me the teams that are involved in said trade, Eddie.
The Atlanta Hawks, again, and the Houston Rockets.
How prominent is the Rocket player that is headed over? I'm going to look at their roster, and I'm just going to spit. But we're going to play Guess the Trade as it happens here. By the way, I'll get back into the concert in a second here. The Houston Rockets, you said, correct? I am not looking at anything. I am strictly looking at the Houston Rockets roster. How prominent a player is the one that is on his way out of Houston?
What if I told you there is no player?
Okay. Then let me pivot and see here with the Atlanta Hawks. So it was a draft. This is for a draft pick, obviously, or some sort of a.
I think so. I don't think there's a player being sent from Houston to Atlanta in this deal.
Now, Atlanta, I'm looking at their roster. How prominent a player in Atlanta is on his way out? They got a lot of players on Atlanta's roster whose names are impossible to pronounce.
This player I don't think has played this season.
Okay. Man, they're really shaking up their roster, aren't they? I will go with Cody Zeller.
Ding, 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 ding.
He like wouldn't report, right? Isn't he just like a salary cap guy at this point?
Uh-huh.
So Cody Zeller's on his way mythically to where?
Houston. Okay. So Atlanta traded him and Houston's 2028 pick to Houston.
Now,
and then Dennis Schroeder is being rerouted to the Detroit Pistons, a part of that Jimmy Butler deal from last night.
Dennis Schroeder, by the way, have you ever noticed his physical makeup? I'm trying to think of the character that I'm thinking of. He's a shorter fellow, but he's got very pronounced shoulders, and then his arms kind of sit perfectly out to the side. And there's like not Wall-E, but like some sort of a robot character that he looks like.
Baymax?
What's that?
I don't know. Baymax from Big Hero 6. It's a newer Disney movie.
Let me see. I'm trying to think of what character I'm trying to think of. There's it's like not an alien character, but I don't know. Like, it'll come to me probably. It's not Baymax. A little thing that that has arms that
Stitch?
Sit directly out to the side. I'm not doing a very good job of explaining this here. Not Stitch. No. This is more like a little robot fella, or he kind of looks like it's like a little robot fella with his arms outright. I don't know. I mean, I'll think of it as soon as we're off the air, and then tomorrow
very
we'll have
helpful.
a great laugh. Yeah,
very helpful.
I know I'm not helping out here. You have to see Dennis Schroeder. That's the problem. If you look at Dennis Schroeder, then you're like, oh, okay, I know exactly what you're talking about. Very pronounced shoulders on Dennis Schroeder.
Oh, yes. Very, very prominent.
Anyway, Billy Joel and Sting, Saturday night, Lucas Oil Stadium. I managed at the last minute to find really good seats for face value. Clearly, somebody just needed to get rid of them.
So you and Shannon? We
are going. We've got dinner downtown. We're going to have
where's dinner?
Home with it.
If you don't mind sharing.
We are going to have dinner. We do this. We usually go to the spot one time a year. It's just
Slippery Noodle?
Everything about us is tradition based, right?
Slippery Noodle?
No, because of the location and because of where we're parking. Because we're parking here, right?
Uh-huh.
Weber Grill.
Oh, nice.
Let's go downtown and go eat at Weber Grill and then walk over from there. Okay, so the trade that took place last night that affects the Pacers is this. And I remember when he was coming out of Duke, Mark Williams was a player that I think that the Pacers were intrigued by him. But he was a one-year guy, if I'm not mistaken, at Duke. But he had incredible athleticism for his size. And he's been a good player. He was kind of a slow starter in the NBA in Charlotte, but he's really doing pretty good numbers now. I think 16-10 roughly. But when Rob Pelinka, running the Lakers, had said, look, there's just nothing out there at the center position, and rim protection is something that we need, I think a lot of people thought, oh, my gosh, they're going to make the trade for Miles Turner. because that has been linked. Turner's been linked to the Lakers since the beginning of time. But with that said, when they went last night and traded for Williams, then I think that officially, even though we knew this was going to be the case, put an end to the Miles Turner possibilities. Now, the question becomes, Eddie, and I have said all along, I don't think the Pacers had any interest in dealing Miles Turner.
I don't think so either.
I think that Herb Simon likes Miles Turner a great deal. I think that the Pacers are willing to go over into the luxury tax, not permanently. They don't want to live there, but if they've got to temporarily, I think they could. But the question becomes then, if you are retaining Miles Turner, you are clearly doing it because of one of two things. Either A, you feel like you don't want to disrupt this roster, or B, and maybe even more importantly, you are confident that you're going to be able to re-sign him. If they thought that they could not re-sign Miles Turner, or if they decided that they don't want to re-sign Miles Turner, then you would think they would, because he has value, obviously. You would have tried to get something right now for him. The fact that he, with 11 minutes remaining here, is still a Pacer leads me to believe that they are confident or they are strategizing for retaining him beyond this season.
I'm fascinated to see if Obi Toppin is moved in the next 10 minutes, because he's the one player that I think we both agree, Jake, if you are trying to shed any salary, he's probably the guy that is being moved. I know Tony East in our conversation earlier talked about moving James Wiseman to open up a little bit of money if any team is willing to absorb that. But I think Toppin, if anybody's being traded, is probably the guy if they're trying to really shed some salary. And plus, if they really are in the thought of getting Jarris Walker more minutes and more consistent minutes, because this is your number 2, and he has had flashes. And if you can find more ways to get him on the floor consistently, my guess is that Toppin is the guy that has to be moved in order to do that.
I mean, it does feel, and this happens sometimes, Eddie, where I think oftentimes guys have a really good, whether it be when they were drafted or when they are acquired to a team, they are part of the I'll call it the Austin Crosher clause, which is where a team gels together, and coinciding with that team gelling together is the emergence of a player where they have a breakout. And obviously in the Austin Crosher case, it would be when the Pacers went to the NBA Finals and Crosher was a big part of that. And so then you're like, okay, this is obviously a player that has to be part of our long-term vision. And in Austin Crosher's case, good player, don't get me wrong, really good player. But he got a huge contract, especially for that era. And then, and even though he is a guy that they kept here and was a centerpiece for a very long time, truthfully, he's getting paid off of the right timing of when the emergence happened, because it coincided, whether coincidence or whether directly aligned with the emergence of a franchise and a team. And when you look, for example, at Obi Toppin, last year everything came into play and fell into place for the Pacers. And yes, there was attrition in the East, but Obi Toppin was a big part of that. And for a guy that kind of got buried in New York, once he found his way here in Indiana, it's like, okay, this guy is a really valuable piece. But did they pay for that smaller sample and overpay maybe a little bit for what it could be in the long run, especially with the emergence of a Jarris Walker, for example? But it kind of comes down to, and you see this a lot, it's not anything personally against Obi Toppin as much as just simply from a numbers standpoint and a dollars and cents standpoint, you have to make room somewhere, right?
Not to mention, you can't afford to be in the lottery like they were a pick 8 and miss. You have to hit it. And the only way for you to know if you've got something is by playing them.
Right.
And I know Rick Carlisle, yes. And I know Carlisle and his coaching staff are big believers in earning it. And I feel like, for the most part, Jarris Walker has earned the right to be on the floor for 20 minutes a night.
I would agree with that now, yeah. I mean, he is. I think he has shown now why you want to get him in rotation. Now, another thing to think about is this. one of the things that helps the Pacers in all of this, truthfully, is the best value that the Pacers have, and the smartest thing they did is lock up Aaron Nesmith. And they didn't lock him up long term, but I'm saying Aaron Nesmith is on a valued contract. If you'd waited and then had to re-sign Aaron Nesmith right now, for example, you're in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
And Walker still being on that rookie deal, you've got to figure out contract-wise where you want to go with that. And I think at this point we've seen enough to know that you want to probably lock him in. But the minutes have to come from somewhere. And Eddie, my concern is that what we're starting to see is that Jarris Walker is, if he gets shuffled down a little bit now, it's right at the time when he's starting to emerge, right?
Mm-hmm. Like, you look at just the past couple of games, he has the DNP earlier this week for the first time of the season. Then he plays in Utah, and I don't think he played against Portland until the final minutes, and maybe then I don't even know if he got into the game. I can't remember, but when they were trailing in that third quarter, and you saw the intensity of Aaron Nesmith defensively, it's like, can you get Jarris on the floor to help bring more energy with that second unit? Because the second unit is what got the Pacers back into the game in the fourth quarter. They cut it down to a 1-point game, and then they run the starters back out there, and the starters give up an 11-point run. Next thing you know, it's a routing in Portland.
By the way, somebody asked if it's iRobot. It's not iRobot that Dennis Schroeder looks like. It's going to drive me nuts. It's a little kind of like an R2D2 looking thing that Dennis Schroeder looks like, right?
You're not talking about Wally, are you?
No, Wally's. Let me see. That's possible. Hold on. Wally was the thing from the movie, right?
Yes.
The little robot guy.
Yeah.
I can't. How do you spell that?
Wall-E.
Wall-E. That's right. Okay. I was thinking it was. Kind of. That's not the fella. Although that doesn't look entirely unlike it. But Dennis Schroeder has very defined arms, very defined shoulders.
Does he have widow arms?
He doesn't know. He's got the opposite of that. Dennis Schroeder is the anti-Kenny Pickett, right?
Widow hands.
Kenny Pickett is the one. Would there be anything more humiliating? Would you even go through the NFL Combine if you knew that everybody was going to talk about how small your hands were? If you knew you had widow hands, would you really want the whole world to know it, or would you be like, yeah, I don't feel well? Would you just skip out on that?
I'm going to be in the NFL, Jake. I don't think me having widow hands is going to matter.
I mean, that's probably true, although it apparently does matter in terms of the longevity of Kenny Pickett as a starter in the NFL, right? Maybe that's one of them where we should have paid attention and listened to what people said about things as absurd as hand size.
Is he one of those guys that gets a second chance and flourishes somewhere else?
He may. I mean, you get that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Change of scenery sometimes is all a guy needs. We've got a ton to get to tomorrow. From everything from the finalization of the trade deadline to recapping the Pacers and the Clippers to keeping an eye on the Mike Woodson situation and, of course, getting you set for the weekend of college basketball and the Super Bowl. We will do it all tomorrow at noon. John is up next. He is at Tom's Watch Bar right downtown Indianapolis on Illinois. He will carry you home until 6 and get you caught up on the trade deadline, amongst other things as well. We thank you for listening to Query